Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Lindley Rennick. Ben Rennick was born on August 4, 1987, in St. Louis, Missouri, USA. He was the second and youngest child in his family. His older brother, Sam, considered Ben a precious gift from the moment he was born. From a young age, Ben developed a fascination with snakes. While attending Montgomery County High School, he immersed himself in learning about them and dreamed of starting a snake breeding business. Although this hobby was uncommon, he found it incredibly interesting. As a child, Ben met Lindley, a girl 4 years his senior. She was beautiful, with long, light hair and delicate features, but Ben was too young to pursue a relationship, so nothing happened between them. After graduating high school, Ben continued to focus on his passion for snakes, expanding his knowledge and gaining respect from other experts in the field. 2 years later, Ben's mother passed away from a serious illness. While this was a painful experience, he decided to move forward, possibly to ease the shock. He focused all his efforts on turning his hobby into a source of income, and eventually, his hard work paid off. By 2010, Ben Rennick had become a successful breeder and established a national business called Rennick Reptiles, which specialized in the selective breeding of designer pythons. The business quickly thrived, and soon, reptiles were being sold to customers worldwide, from the UK to Japan. Although Sam and Ben had separate homes, they continued to live on the family farm with their father, honoring their mother's wish not to abandon it after her passing. The 28-acre property provided ample space, allowing the brothers to maintain a close relationship. They often spent weekends fishing together and enjoyed a strong brotherhood. As the business grew, the facility became home to over 3,000 reptiles, some valued at $1,000 each. Ben enjoyed success and often traveled to conventions across the United States, earning a reputation as a prominent figure in the reptile community, even being referred to as the rock star of snakes. In interviews, he attributed his success to his careful attention to his pets and his commitment to his clients. In 2011, he felt particularly fortunate when he reconnected with Lindley, a girl he had had a crush on during his youth. Before reconnecting with Ben, Lindley had been in several relationships. She was initially involved with a man named Michael Humphrey, who was later imprisoned for banned substance possession. After another unsuccessful relationship, Lindley became a mother to a son. By the time she reached out to Ben again, she was single, and Ben had matured, making their communication smooth and comfortable. Ben confidently pursued Lindley, and their relationship quickly became serious. Ben quickly became overwhelmed by the success he achieved at a young age. He was a respected professional, admired by many. Ben was not only business-minded but also kind and mature for his age, which allowed him to take on a fatherly role for Lindley's son, whom he embraced as his own. Eventually, Lindley, her son, and Ben began living together. Tragedy struck the family in 2012 when Frank, the father of Ben and Sam, was involved in a stock scheme that caused significant financial losses for many people. Then, Ben discovered that his father had taken his own life. This devastating event forced the brothers to inherit the family property and confront their loss once again, now complicated by the shame surrounding the incident. Ben found comfort in his personal professional project and in a long-awaited moment with Lindley. In 2014, she accepted his marriage proposal, and that year, they celebrated a wedding. Soon after, they welcomed a daughter named Emma. In his free time, Ben enjoyed playing the drums and watching horror films, but his main focus was on his family. He valued the time spent with his wife and children. To keep the romance alive, he organized weekly date nights with Lindley, just as they had done when they were engaged. This was also his way of showing appreciation for Lindley's hard work, as she dedicated herself to helping him manage their snakes, which involved cleaning and sorting. In 2016, they launched a second business, this time in the personal hygiene sector. They opened a spa in a shopping center in Columbia, Missouri, something Lindley had always dreamed of, given her background as an experienced massage therapist. She invited her longtime friend, Ashley Shaw, to join the salon. Their success continued into 2017, when Ben made a $1 million deal selling some of his pythons and anacondas. The agreement included quarterly payments of $200,000, starting with the first payment in February. However, Linley's business was facing serious financial problems. In early 2017, she had credit debt, and two companies sued her for over $88,000 in unpaid bills for work done in previous years. Additionally, Linley was hiding more than just her financial troubles. She created a profile on a dating app and began an affair with a man named Brandon Blackwell, meeting him a few times each month. For reasons that could include her financial struggles, ambition, or feelings of betrayal, Linley started to contemplate how to rid herself of her husband, Ben, although she never openly expressed this desire. Linley confided in Ashley, who worked at the spa, claiming that she was a victim of violence and abuse from Ben. Taking advantage of this situation, she persuaded her friend to help her escape. Ashley agreed and provided Linley with banned substance. On one night in 2017, Linley secretly drugged Ben by spiking his protein shake with a nearly lethal dose of illegal substances. Miraculously, Ben survived the ordeal, although he became very ill and took a long time to recover. Throughout this process, he never suspected that his wife was involved. The bank that Linley was in debt to informed Ben of the situation. Aware of the crisis at the spa and his wife's deception, Ben spoke up and shared his feelings with her. This led to a tense atmosphere between them that lasted for several weeks. In mid-May 2017, Linley decided to contact her ex-boyfriend Michael, who had just been released from prison. She and Ashley visited him at his home. During their conversation, which seemed casual as they reminisced about their past relationship, Linley claimed to be a victim of an abusive husband. She even confessed to Michael about her failed attempt to use a protein drink to escape her situation. Linley expressed that she felt trapped and was determined to file for divorce, but she was also afraid of how Ben would react, fearing that his response could threaten her life and the lives of her children. While continuing her affair with Brandon, Linley made the mistake of sharing every detail of her plans to remove Ben from her life. On June 8, 2017, Linley and her ex-boyfriend Michael went to the farm, equipped with gloves, a gun, and a plan. Linley intended to introduce Michael as an old friend interested in Ben's business. However, when Michael saw Ben busy cleaning the breeding facilities, he felt uneasy. He asked Linley to go back to the car, where he handed her the gun and suggested that she take charge of the plan. Without hesitation or fear, Linley returned to the scene and, seeing that Ben was focused on his work, she attacked him multiple times. Michael picked up most of the shell casings he found, but he missed a few that were left behind. Afterward, he and Linley went to the spa, where Linley removed her clothes. Ashley was there, and Linley asked her to help wash her body and arms thoroughly. During this time, Linley explained to Ashley what had happened. Later, Linley returned to the snake nursery and pretended to be surprised and upset. She called Sam to inform him about Ben's situation. Sam rushed to the scene, upon arrival, thought Ben had been bitten by an anaconda because his skull looked crushed and there were 2 puncture wounds on his arm that resembled bite marks. Sam immediately called emergency services. Montgomery County Coroner Dave Colbert had described the scene as one of the strangest and most dangerous he had encountered in his 20-year career. Investigators searched the nursery, which housed 10-foot pythons and anacondas weighing over 90 kilograms. They were unsure where the anaconda might be hiding. As they carefully examined the area, Colbert made a shocking discovery: Ben's body, lying face down, concealed the actual cause of death. It wasn't an anaconda bite that killed him. He had been attacked with a weapon 8 times at close range. Investigators initially considered the possibility of a botched robbery but dismissed it since none of the snakes were missing. The evidence at the crime scene suggested that Ben was familiar with his killer. The agents decided to closely monitor those who were closest to Ben, ensuring that no potential suspects were overlooked. The day after the murder, detectives questioned Sam and then Linley. A surprising moment occurred when Linley tried to blame Sam for the crime, but this theory was never pursued. Sam, who had no gunpowder residue on his hands and fully cooperated with the investigation, was released. While the detectives continued their work, the community of reptile breeders came together to support Ben's wife and children by organizing an online auction for snakes. However, just 11 days after Ben's murder, Lindley, who everyone thought was grieving, made a shocking confession during another interrogation of her. She revealed that at the time of the murder, she had an alibi. She was with Brandon, her affair partner. Detectives investigated the alibis of Lindley and Brandon, confirming they were not involved. Next, they questioned Ashley. At the same time, they examined Lindley and Ben's Facebook accounts, discovered that the spa was facing financial difficulties, which had made Ben very angry. For months after the incident, Lindley returned to the police station and agreed to take a polygraph test. However, the test was unsuccessful when she was asked about her relationship with her ex-boyfriend Michael and the messages they had exchanged in the hours surrounding Ben's death. Lindley stated that Michael had visited the snake farm as a client. Lindley faced a lot of circumstantial evidence that seemed to implicate her, and investigators made this clear to her. However, her gunshot residue test came back negative. Without any witnesses, a murder weapon, or direct evidence tying her to the crime, the officers had no option but to let her go free from the interrogation room. A few weeks later, claiming financial difficulties, Lindley closed the spa and quickly left town. Before leaving, she put the family property up for sale. In February 2018, she applied for 2 types of property payments from the family allowance, totaling $15,000, along with monthly family benefits. That summer, she sold Ben's property to a married couple for over $740,000, unaware that the police were suspicious of her. Sam remained oblivious to her connection to his brother's murder. Months passed with no arrests made. Snake enthusiasts confused and reached out to each other for any information about the case. Sam and others in Ben's close circle wanted to support Lindley as much as they could. However, as time passed, they noticed something was wrong when she refused to talk to them, wouldn't let Sam see the children, and prevented him from taking Ben's belongings. A year and a half after Ben's murder, Lindley and Brandon had a child together, but Lindley soon claimed that Brandon had become aggressive, leading her to break up with him. She also secured a restraining order against him and accused him of violence. Brandon denied these claims but ended up in jail because of them. Meanwhile, speculation grew about the murder, with many people suspecting that Lindley might have been involved or even orchestrated it through someone else. This question lingered for nearly 3 years without any answers, leaving authorities with little progress in the investigation. In January 2020, the case took an unexpected, welcome turn. Brandon, who was in jail, decided to make a deal. He contacted the police to share what he knew about Ben's unsolved murder case, claiming he was closely involved. This prompted a renewed investigation. On January 16, 2020, the police arrested Lindley and Michael for murder, shocking their close friends. Sam felt relieved to finally learn the truth. However, investigators needed more evidence. They sought a witness who could provide crucial details. The detectives then arrested Ashley and explained her potential legal consequences. She could either align with Lindley and face severe charges as an accomplice or cooperate with the investigation, which could lead to Lindley being charged with first-degree murder. The authorities promised Ashley leniency if she agreed to cooperate. She ultimately revealed everything, from the harmful ingredients in the lethal cocktail to the details of the murder. Nonetheless, the murder weapon was still missing. By the end of 2021, Sam was preparing for the trials against the alleged murderers of his brother. He was mainly focused on staying composed throughout the process. Lindley's defense team was working hard to prevent Brandon's testimony from being included in the trial. The prosecution argued that Lindley had fired the gun and that Michael Humphrey was also part of the plan. The defense countered by claiming that Lindley had tricked Michael into coming to a snake farm by telling him she needed protection for a divorce discussion with Ben. They stated that Michael was caught off guard when Lindley suddenly pulled out a weapon and attacked Ben. Ultimately, the jury did not see Michael as an innocent witness and found him guilty of first-degree murder after several hours of deliberation. Facing a life sentence, Michael changed his account, claiming he had supplied the gun used by Lindley. He agreed to cooperate with the investigation in hopes of being released on parole. He guided the investigators to the murder weapon, which had been hidden in the attic of Lindley's mother's house. With the weapon recovered, the jury now had to address the lingering question: who actually pulled the trigger? The prosecution painted Lindley as a woman as cold-blooded as one of Ben's snakes, portraying her as a killer who attacked Ben and then continued her day as if nothing had happened. As the trial neared its conclusion, the defense made a bold move by allowing Lindley to recount the troubled and violent marriage she claimed she was escaping. However, she had no evidence to support her story, and there were no police reports documenting any physical abuse. Nearly 5 years had passed since Ben's murder, and a weary Sam awaited the jury's decision regarding Lindley. After 12 hours of deliberation, the judge delivered the verdict: Lindley Rennick was sentenced to 16 years in prison. Sam's disappointment with the sentence seemed to resonate with the judge, but Missouri state laws prevented any increase in the sentence. Lindley would become eligible for parole in 2035, and the charges against Brandon were dismissed. Ben's close friends still remember him as if he were alive. A new species of snake, called the Rennick ghost, was named in his honor. This snake is distinct for having fewer black spots, which gives it a ghostly appearance, a strong symbol of how much he meant to the community. They continue to miss him deeply, and at every event his friends attend, there is always an empty spot that can never be filled. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Elisa Matthewson. This story takes place in a small town called Valrico, Florida, with a population of about 5,000 people. Elisa was a devoted wife and a caring mother. She had been married to Trevor Summers for over 15 years, but eventually decided to file for divorce. The reason for this is Trevor's relentless need to control every aspect of Elisa's life and their children's lives. When Elisa informed Trevor of her decision to divorce, he vehemently opposed it. He began using their children as tools to manipulate her, hoping she would reconsider. Elisa and Trevor first met in 1995 while attending high school in a Philadelphia suburb. They started dating 3 years later and quickly formed a strong bond. Both were outgoing, charismatic, and serious about their future together, but they felt unprepared to settle down owing to their lack of career achievements. They decided to prioritize building their careers before starting a family. In 2001, after years of dating, Elisa and Trevor got married, marking an important milestone in their lives. Their friends and family fully supported their decision. At this time, their relationship had stood the test of time. For Elisa, marriage was the realization of a long-held dream of creating a family. Soon after, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Arden. Over the years, they had 4 more children: Landon, Bryn, Grady, and Cooper. Elisa found joy in growing their family, believing that each child added more love to their lives. However, Trevor had different priorities and chose to focus on advancing his career. Trevor initially a landscaping business, but soon moved on to launching a pool building and maintenance company. After that, he ventured into real estate and pursued various other business ideas. He was passionate about being an entrepreneur, and Elisa supported him in all his efforts. However, Trevor often started businesses quickly, and most of them failed before making any significant profits. He struggled to find a clear direction, and most of his ventures didn't generate much income. Trevor's constant pursuit of new opportunities caused the family to move frequently. Over the years, they lived in Pennsylvania, Florida, Vegas, and California, finally settling permanently in Sunshine State. These relocations made homeschooling necessary for their children. Elisa took on the dual role of teacher and homemaker, while their eldest daughter, Arden, helped with chores. Despite her many responsibilities, Elisa managed everything with ease. The family often hosted guests and lively gatherings where Trevor would enthusiastically share his latest ideas. They lived in a beautiful house near the beach, creating the appearance of an ideal life. Over time, their relationship started to fall apart. Arden, the eldest daughter, recalled many happy moments. The family often spent time together at the beach, played video games, or enjoyed board games. While Arden was always close to her mother, she had an especially strong bond with her father and was often called a daddy's girl. Sadly, this close relationship later allowed Trevor to manipulate the situation. As Arden entered her teenage years, Elisa began to notice how Trevor exerted more control over her and the children. With each new child, his dominance grew, affecting every part of their daily lives. Elisa was eventually restricted to wearing only clothes Trevor approved of, socializing only with people he allowed, and having her social media activity closely monitored. He prohibited her from speaking to men online and displayed extreme jealousy. Trevor's possessiveness escalated to the point where he forbade Elisa from standing or sitting near any male strangers at church. He would become upset even if she simply walked past or greeted someone she knew. Some people, including Elisa, believed that Trevor's extreme behavior was tied to the family's financial troubles. By that time, Elisa had witnessed several business dealings that revealed Trevor was deeply in debt, often failing to pay others or collect money owed to him. He was even arrested multiple times on suspicion of financial fraud. Each time, Trevor shifted the blame onto others or external factors. It became increasingly clear that he was not suited for the business world. Despite his repeated failures, Trevor stubbornly defended his business ventures and refused to let Elisa have any input. At the same time, he tightened his control over their home life, becoming harsher and creating an even more oppressive domestic environment. By 2016, Elisa had grown weary of her life and decided to ask for a divorce. However, this was not part of Trevor's plans. He pleaded with her to stay for the sake of their children and promised to change. Still in love with him, Elisa decided to give him another chance. Unfortunately, instead of improving, Trevor became even more controlling. He confiscated her phone and car and forbade her from leaving the house, effectively trapping her as if she were a prisoner. It became clear that this was outright domestic abuse and highly dangerous. Elisa began contemplating ways to escape, unaware that Trevor was also making his own plans concerning her. By October 2016, Trevor's control over Elisa had reached an extreme level. For weeks, he had not allowed her to leave the house even once. He monitored her every move around the clock, never letting her out of his sight. This behavior alarmed Elisa, as she sensed that something terrible was about to happen. She feared what Trevor might be planning and anxiously waited for an opportunity to break free. One day, Trevor left the house to run errands but locked his family inside. Taking advantage of the rare opportunity when he was absent, Elisa secretly used her phone to contact an organization that supports victims of domestic violence. She explained that this was her first chance in weeks to act without Trevor's control. The organization warned her that her situation was urgent and extremely dangerous. That evening, when Trevor returned, he lashed out at Elisa, accusing her of ridiculous acts of infidelity and subjecting her to further emotional and physical abuse. Thankfully, the authorities had already been notified, and their timely arrival at the house pressured Trevor into letting Elisa and the children leave. Reluctantly, he agreed, though it was clear he had no intention of letting go quietly. Elisa soon faced housing challenges, forcing her and the children to seek refuge in a shelter for domestic violence survivors. The shelter provided them with protection from Trevor's control and allowed them to feel somewhat secure. Over time, the harassment stopped, much to Elisa's relief. After several months in the shelter, she believed their ordeal was over and moved out with the children. With the support of social services, Elisa secured a place to live, a car, and a job, and she began the process of filing for divorce. Convinced that Trevor was out of her life for good, she felt optimism about the future. Encouraged by her newfound freedom, she even started exploring online dating and meeting new people. However, Elisa was wrong in her assumptions. After the divorce was finalized and custody arrangements were settled, she had to meet Trevor twice a week to exchange the children. These meetings were filled with noticeable tension, but no further aggressive outbursts occurred. By January 2017, Trevor seemed to have accepted the situation. A month later, he called Elisa, claiming there were some divorce-related documents she needed to sign. Trusting his recent calm demeanor, Elisa went to Trevor's house without any suspicion. At that time, Trevor's life was falling apart. He was facing possible imprisonment due to fraud allegations, and the image he had carefully crafted as a successful businessman and devoted family man also was crumbling. When Elisa arrived, Trevor tried to provoke her into a conversation, accusing her once again of infidelity and demanding a confession. In reality, there were no documents for her to sign. This was merely a ruse to draw her into a confrontation. When she attempted to leave, Trevor grabbed a machete, pressed it against her chest, and then held it to her throat. He kept her in this terrifying situation for several hours. Elisa eventually managed to calm him down and convinced him to let her go by promising not to call the police. Despite her promise, Elisa contacted emergency services as soon as she left. When the police arrived, Trevor denied everything, claiming she was lying and even threatened her life. Since there were no visible injuries on Elisa, the police believed his version of events. Following this incident, both Elisa and Trevor filed restraining orders against each other. Trevor began to take advantage of the situation to make the kids believe him, telling them that she was trying to send him to prison and take away his time with them. Trevor continued to build his narrative, blaming Elisa for the family's breakup. He told the children that he planned to reunite with them, and they eagerly believed him. The children were unaware of Elisa's living situation or the danger Trevor posed to her, as he had never directed his abuse at the children. This ignorance allowed Trevor to keep his growing children unaware of the true situation and the danger he represented to Elisa. Arden was manipulated by Trevor into becoming his informant. She spied on her mother and reported back to him. On March 11, 2017, Arden followed Trevor's instructions and informed Trevor when her mother went to bed with the younger children. She also left a window open for him. That night, Trevor arrived at Elisa's house with Landon, who stayed in the car, while leaving his 3-year-old son, Cooper, home alone, asleep in bed. He broke into the house, attacked Elisa, and took her phone to prevent her from contacting the authorities. He then dragged her into the living room, where the children ran out to check on their mother. Trevor ordered the children to return to their rooms and stay there until he allowed them to come out. Meanwhile, Arden remained in Trevor's car, watching over Landon. She believed that her parents were calmly talking and working out their problems, and that they would soon come out so they could all return to their dad's house and be a happy family again, just like before. But that outcome never came to pass. Around 4 a.m., Trevor sent his daughter a message saying the plan had changed. He instructed her to enter the house. When Arden came inside, Elisa saw her daughter and painfully realized that her daughter had sided with Trevor. Trevor then told Arden to take the other children to the car and drive them to his home. He assured her he would return later with Elisa in her car after resolving their reconciliation issues. The girl Arden trusted her father and agreed to help. While the inexperienced teenager desperately tried not to get into an accident on the road, Trevor tied his ex-wife to the bed. Over the next few hours, Trevor made wild claims about having millions of dollars in offshore accounts, preparing a yacht, and planning to escape into international waters. During this time, he repeatedly assaulted Elisa, using a weapon to intimidate her. He also forced her to take sedative medication, causing her to periodically fall asleep during the abuse and making it impossible for her to resist. At one point, Trevor used Elisa's phone to record a video in which he described his plan, in which he said, "I'm here with Elisa at her house, which I'm not allowed to be in. I woke Elisa up and held her against her will." Around 6 a.m., he tried to suffocate her by placing a pillow over her face and sitting on it. Desperate to survive, Elisa agreed to whatever he demanded, including going with him to the yacht and fleeing into international waters. Trevor eventually decided to leave, taking Elisa with him. She did not resist because she understood that Trevor was not in control of himself in these moments and was extremely dangerous. It was clearly a matter of life and death. They got into the car and started driving. About an hour later, Trevor parked near a supermarket on the outskirts of town to buy some supplies. While he was getting out of the car, Elisa managed to jump out, screaming for help. She ran toward a young man working at the supermarket, who had just stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. Before she could reach him, another man, large, muscular, and leaving the store with his shopping bags, grabbed her. He twisted her arms behind her back and forced her back into the car. "That man is Trevor," then got into the driver's seat and drove away. The supermarket employee, alarmed by what he had witnessed and suspecting a kidnapping, called 911. He provided authorities with the car's make, color, and license plate number. The car was quickly identified as that of Trevor Summers. A man had recently gone through a contentious divorce. Investigators quickly looked into Trevor and realized Elisa had previously filed several domestic violence complaints against him. This information painted a deeply troubling picture. Suspecting foul play, detectives decided to visit Elisa's home, where she lived with her children. However, when they arrived, the house was empty. The children were eventually found at Trevor's house, being cared for by Arden. When asked about their parents' whereabouts, none of the children could provide an answer. It became increasingly evident that Elisa had been kidnapped and was in grave danger. Understanding the sensitivity of the situation, the police opted to speak carefully with the children to avoid alarming them. Both parents' phones were turned off and untraceable, leaving the police with no immediate leads. Instead of scaring the children with suggestions that their mother may have been abducted by their father, officers gently questioned them to assess the situation. As the children described their parents' relationship, the police were shocked, especially considering the young ages of the witnesses. All the children recounted incidents of Trevor abusing Elisa. Though the children themselves were never physically harmed, they recalled seeing their mother tied up by Trevor, with her hands and feet bound for hours. That evening, Arden unintentionally helped him with his plans. While on the phone with her father, Trevor convinced Arden that he wanted to reconcile with Elisa and repair their relationship. He instructed Arden to leave a window open after everyone in the house had gone to bed, claiming it was part of a plan to surprise Elisa. Trusting her father's intentions, the naive girl complied. This gave Trevor access to the house, and without realizing his true motives, Arden unknowingly became complicit in his scheme. During the night, while the rest of the family was asleep, Trevor entered the bedroom where his ex-wife Elisa was sleeping. Her 7-year-old daughter, Bryn, and 5-year-old son, Grady, were also in the room. Elisa woke up to something wet dripping on her face and, still disoriented, sensed a threatening presence. Standing over her was Trevor, pressing a damp cloth against her face. Overcome with fear, Elisa screamed and struggled. At first, she couldn't identify who it was, but she soon realized it was Trevor. Frantically, she threw objects from her bedside table at him in an attempt to defend herself. However, Trevor grabbed her by the ankles, dragged her out of bed, and onto the floor. Her loud screams woke the children, who instinctively realized their father was attacking their mother. They cried and pleaded with him not to harm her. Trevor then dragged Elisa into another room, warning the children to stay out. What exactly happened to Elisa in that room remained a mystery to the children. Hours later, Arden took the children and drove them to their father's house. The police were continuing their search for Trevor. Based on the children's statements, detectives reconstructed the events and used the information to initiate a detailed search for Trevor, attempting to predict his escape routes. However, what the children didn't know was that Trevor had access to a yacht and millions of dollars, giving him a possible advantage in evading authorities. Before that, when leaving the supermarket, Trevor drove Elisa along rural roads near the Tampa Bay coastline, stopping occasionally in isolated areas. Enraged by her escape attempt, he retaliated by slashing her wrists with a razor and yelling at her. Eventually, he took her to a small, abandoned town, where they stayed for more than a day. During this time, Elisa saw Trevor writing suicide notes addressed to his children and the police. He continued to assault her throughout the ordeal. Despite the horrors she endured, Elisa focused on thoughts of her children and remained determined to survive for their sake. On the morning of March 13, Trevor and Elisa arrived in Little Harbor, a resort area where they had frequently vacationed as a family. Elisa immediately saw this as a bad omen because the location held significant meaning for Trevor, and she feared it might be where he planned to end both of their lives. Trevor parked the SUV behind a dumpster, moved to the back seat, and wrapped a rope around Elisa's neck. For several moments, he strangled her, and Elisa felt she was on the verge of death. Suddenly, Trevor let go of the rope and moved to the driver's seat. He sped off down a dirt road toward the beach. Unbeknownst to Trevor, police vehicles were closing in from behind. Then, when he realized he couldn't escape, he stopped the SUV, took out the razor he had previously used to threaten Elisa, and began slashing his own throat. Elisa screamed in terror, pleading with him to stop. The police surrounded the vehicle, forcing Trevor to drop the blade. They quickly helped Elisa escape from the horrific scene. Despite her injuries, Elisa survived. Both she and Trevor were taken to the nearest hospital for treatment. Trevor's injuries were not life-threatening. Elisa later gave a detailed account of the abuse she had endured at Trevor's hands. However, even then, Trevor denied any wrongdoing. He claimed Elisa had gone with him willingly, asked to be tied up, and consented to the violence as part of her interest in extreme intimacy. This blatant lie was dismissed by everyone. Trevor faced 11 charges, including attempted murder, kidnapping, abuse assault, and endangering the lives of his children. He denied all accusations, which delayed the trial. Additional setbacks arose from bureaucratic issues. Thankfully, Trevor was denied bail and remained in custody, allowing Elisa and her children to feel safer. Trevor spent 5 years in detention before preliminary hearings began in 2022. Prosecutors argued that his actions were premeditated and that Elisa would have died if the police had not intervened in time. In contrast, his defense attorney claimed the events were a coincidence caused by the stress Trevor had been under due to his wife's behavior. The defense even argued that Elisa had asked to be kidnapped and treated roughly. However, the prosecution's case was strong, supported by overwhelming evidence that disproved Trevor's claims. This included a video Trevor had recorded himself, handwritten confessions, suicide notes, and testimony from a store employee Elisa had approached for help. Physical evidence, such as the pillow he used to smother her and the ropes used to restrain her. Consequently, the defense's version sounded completely unconvincing. Elisa testified in court against her ex-husband Trevor, declaring she was no longer afraid of him and was determined to see him sentenced to life in prison for the 55 hours of torment he had inflicted on her. Despite this, the case was far from over, and much depended on the eloquence of Elisa, the prosecutor, and Trevor's attorney. During several hours of questioning, Elisa provided detailed accounts of the abuse she suffered before the kidnapping. including acts of torture, physical violence, and threats. Her testimony appeared to deeply resonate with the jury. Following her statements, Trevor underwent cross-examination. His testimony lasted over an hour, but as he spoke, the prosecution seemed increasingly confident in their case. It became evident that their position was stronger. Despite this, Trevor's defense attorney continued to search for weaknesses in the prosecution's arguments, aiming to minimize Trevor's culpability. Much of the defense's questioning focused on the abuse allegations. The attorney tried to convince the jury that everything had been consensual, thereby attempting to undermine the prosecution's case. They also tried to portray Elisa as manipulative and deceitful, claiming she had intentionally pushed Trevor to his breaking point, triggering his aggression and subsequent actions. Elisa and Trevor's children are 13-year-old Bryn and 19-year-old Arden, also participated in the hearings. Bryn had vivid and clear memories of the night her father assaulted her mother. The children's fear was unmistakable, and it became increasingly apparent that Trevor could no longer evade justice. When asked about the wound on his neck, Trevor claimed it was the result of emotional distress, stemming from a stressful situation. The defense attorney emphasized that Trevor had no prior criminal record or history of violence. Nonetheless, the incident with Elisa severely undermined his credibility. The hearings lasted 3 days. In closing arguments, the defense attorney contended that the alleged kidnapping was merely Trevor's misguided attempt to reconcile with his wife, which had spiraled out of control. Elisa, however, firmly asserted that she had narrowly escaped being murdered and described Trevor as extremely dangerous. In a last-ditch effort, the defense questioned whether Elisa had been attacked in her home, pointing to the absence of blood, broken furniture, or other signs of a struggle. The claim that she had been tied up in a car in a supermarket parking lot was also contested. However, these arguments resembled the desperate attempts of a defense team that had become entangled in its own inconsistent versions of events. The jury deliberated for over 5 hours before reaching a verdict. Ultimately, they found Trevor guilty on all charges. For Elisa, justice was finally served. Overcome with emotion, she broke down in tears and fell into the arms of Jeff Matthewson, whom she had met shortly before the 2017 attack. Jeff had been a constant source of support throughout her ordeal. Elisa believed her ex-husband's aggression might have been fueled by his jealousy of Jeff, while others speculated that Trevor's actions stemmed from his despair over losing control of his life. In 2021, Elisa married Jeff, describing him as the person who made her feel truly safe for the first time. In later interviews, she spoke openly about the devastating impact Trevor had on her life and family, as well as the extreme and dangerous measures he had taken. Trevor's manipulative behavior, particularly involving their children, left lasting scars. Arden, one of their children, struggled to relearn how to trust others, a process made even harder by the cruelty they had witnessed from an early age. The court sentenced Trevor to life in a Florida state prison, along with an additional 224 years to be served consecutively, ensuring he will never be released. Despite this, Trevor remains determined to appeal the sentence and is actively pursuing that effort. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Heather Garaus. Shauna Nelson has been a 911 switchboard employee for about 13 years. She is known for being calm and professional. Shauna and Greeley Ignacio Garaus met while playing on the same baseball team, where they got to know each other and even flirted. However, there is one important detail. Shauna has been a wife and mother of 3 for many years. She is married to Weld Ken Nelson, who also works for the police department. Despite this, Shauna believes that her marriage is over, and she no longer feels attracted to her husband. Her relationship with Greeley began when her marriage was falling apart. During this difficult time, she found herself attracted to him, and their friendship quickly turned into love. However, Greeley was also married. His wife, Heather Garaus, was someone he met during his senior year of college. They were affectionate and supportive of each other, and their initial attraction blossomed into a loving marriage. Greeley seemed like the perfect partner, which was important to Heather because she had suffered abuse in a previous relationship. Early on, Greeley witnessed the abuse in Heather's relationship with her ex-boyfriend, who began stalking her. Fortunately, Greeley stepped in and quickly resolved the situation, chasing the stalker away. He helped Heather put an end to the abuse she was enduring. Just a few months into their relationship, Greeley proposed to Heather. She accepted his proposal, but with one important condition. She required his unwavering loyalty and warned that if he cheated on her, they would end their relationship forever. Soon after finishing school, the newlyweds began their careers. Heather worked at a bank while going to school, and now she could devote more time to her work. She applied for a management position and quickly began climbing the career ladder. Within a few years, Heather became the head of the bank where she worked. Greeley was a police officer and was heavily involved in city management. He balanced his dedication to his job with his love for his wife. 5 years after their wedding, they finally welcomed their first daughter. Heather's life seemed stable, but fate had many challenges in store for the couple. The first challenge came in 1997, when Heather's father suddenly died of a heart attack. She struggled to cope with the loss, but that was only the beginning. A week later, Heather's mother was diagnosed with cancer. Despite early detection, the medical technology of the time was not effective in treating it. Despite the efforts of doctors and various therapies, the disease progressed, and Heather's mother passed away in 2003, unable to overcome the illness. After these events, Heather fell into a deep depression. She had always been very close to her parents and never expected to lose them so suddenly and at such a young age. She struggled to cope with the loss. Managing household chores had previously come easily to her, but now it was difficult. Her husband, Greeley, tried to support her by being understanding, spending more time with their daughter, and helping with the housework. However, despite his efforts, he felt stuck and could not make progress for several months. Greeley was busy with his work at the police station and could only attend to his housework in his spare time. Over time, frustration began to build. The couple sought the help of a therapist, who prescribed medication to help Heather overcome her depression and regain focus on her life. Gradually, the therapy began to work, and she started to participate in her normal activities again. However, the stress of the past few months took its toll on their relationship. Greeley, feeling overwhelmed, began to seek comfort outside of their marriage. Greeley increasingly stayed late at work, seemingly avoiding his family. It was during this time that he met Shauna and Weld after a baseball game. Greeley and Shauna began a secret romantic relationship. It seemed they did not hide their affair well, as almost everyone at the police station knew about it. From the start, Greeley and Shauna's relationship was tumultuous. Shauna had a hot temper and often had difficulty controlling her emotions. This led to aggressive outbursts during their arguments, regardless of who was around. The main source of conflict was Greeley's marriage. He did not want to leave his wife, while Shauna pressured him to be with her. She declared that she would leave her husband for Greeley at any time. After 6 months of this troubled relationship, things took a turn when Shauna announced that she was pregnant with Greeley's child. Greeley denied paternity, believing that her husband was the father. However, Shauna argued that her husband had undergone a vasectomy after they had 3 children, leaving him infertile. She insisted that Greeley was the father. Greeley began pressuring Shauna to have an abortion. It was clear that Greeley had no intention of leaving his wife for her. Shauna, feeling trapped in this situation, realized that her husband Weld would leave her if he found out she was pregnant. She eventually felt forced to have an abortion, a choice she would regret for a long time. However, Shauna could not learn from the experience. In mid-2005, she became pregnant again with Greeley's child, and this time refused to have an abortion. This new pregnancy prompted Shauna to try to keep Greeley close to her and the child. In response, Greeley tried to distance himself from Shauna. She now planned to expose Greeley's infidelity to his wife, Heather. She believed that if Heather found out the truth, she would leave Greeley, allowing him to be with Shauna. Shauna's first encounter with Greeley's wife, Heather, turned into a nightmare for Shauna. She followed Heather in a store, then approached Heather, boasted about her intimate relationship with Greeley, and claimed that Heather's husband loved Shauna. Shauna's inappropriate behavior backfired. Even after she admitted to cheating and having an affair with Greeley, Heather still did not believe her. Heather considered her a scammer. Shauna did not stop there. She continued to contact Heather via phone, text, and social media. Heather blocked her number, but it did not work. Shauna followed her and showed up unexpectedly to see Heather around town. Heather was distressed and often shared her concerns with her family and husband about Shauna's disturbing behavior. Unfortunately, Greeley was unable to intervene, as discussions with Shauna were no longer productive. Heather was confused and scared by these situations. Greeley promised to fix the problem, but his attempts to communicate with Shauna did not go well. She continued to act increasingly brazen and obsessive. To the surprise of those around her, she even showed up uninvited at a party at Greeley's house. At this point, their secret relationship had lasted about 2 years. All of Greeley's attempts to end things with Shauna caused her to become depressed and reckless. Fortunately, she was eventually kicked out of the party. The joy did not last long. The next morning, Shauna continued to visit the Greeley house. Early that morning, she knocked on the door while Greeley was still sleeping. Even so, she insisted on knocking to wake him up. Heather tried to calm down the panicked Shauna and even threatened to call the police, unaware that Shauna also worked in law enforcement. Eventually, Heather became so confused that she felt the need to gain a better understanding of the situation. She worried not only for her own safety, but also for her family, especially her daughter, fearing that Shauna might harm them. A major conflict broke out when Greeley finally woke up. He tried to calm Heather down, promising to work things out with Shauna. Meanwhile, Shauna's husband, Weld, was unaware of her infidelity, despite also working in the police force. His curiosity was piqued when he accidentally glanced at her diary on the table in their bedroom. As he read through it, Weld discovered details of Shauna's affair with Greeley, a painful revelation for him. She described in detail how Weld had lost all attraction to her, and that Greeley was not her first lover. She had been unfaithful for a long time. When the truth was revealed, Weld was shocked and angry to learn that the affair had lasted for 2 years, and that Heather and Greeley had even been intimate in their family home and car. Weld wanted a divorce and was open about it. During an argument about the affair, Shauna revealed that she was pregnant by her lover. She tried to play on Weld's emotions by mentioning his infertility and claiming that she just wanted another child, which caused her to seek comfort outside their marriage. However, Weld was not moved by her attempts to manipulate him and told her to leave the house. This put Shauna in a difficult position. She did not want to leave Weld, and the thought of being a single mother was terrifying. She decided to contact Greeley, the father of her unborn child. After the marriage ended, she hoped to reconnect with Greeley. She excitedly shared with Greeley that she was divorcing her husband and had decided to keep their child. She ignored Greeley's hesitation about the divorce and repeatedly expressed her desire for him to start a family with her. At this point, Greeley only wanted to reconcile with his wife Heather. He no longer valued Shauna and insisted on having an abortion. Shauna was angry because she felt unsupported and did not expect Greeley to turn his back on her. Realizing that Greeley would not meet her expectations, she chose to contact Weld, her ex-husband. Unfortunately, he was hurt and did not want to talk to her during this difficult time. Feeling lonely, Shauna sought support from her best friend, Michelle Moore. Michelle and Shauna had been friends since childhood and had a close relationship, as they both worked in law enforcement, with Michelle being a deputy sheriff. Shauna often confided in Michelle about her feelings. Michelle encouraged Shauna to mend her relationship with her husband, Weld. However, Shauna would not give up on her plans to start a family with Greeley. She thought about their future and considered his wife the main obstacle to her happiness, which she planned to deal with later. Following Michelle's advice, Shauna reconciled with Weld. Despite their past problems, Weld forgave her and agreed to adopt her unborn child as his own. In March 2006, Shauna gave birth to a baby boy. Greeley tried to keep this a secret from his wife by lying. However, Heather had long suspected Greeley of having an affair. Shauna's behavior was not only strange, but it also raised more serious concerns. Greeley was skilled at avoiding direct questions, making it difficult for Heather to confront him. That spring, while they were out for a walk, Heather pressed him to tell the truth. Greeley finally admitted that he had been having an affair with Shauna Nelson, who had been following them. Despite this confession, he claimed that they had ended their relationship, but this was not true. Greeley continued to have an affair with Shauna, despite her stalking, which only intensified her feelings for him. He found Shauna's actions disturbing, but he did not end the relationship. Greeley was at a loss as to how to handle the situation. Heather was surprised to learn that the affair had lasted for a long time. Greeley later revealed that Shauna was pregnant with his second child and had chosen not to abort the baby. He attempted to rationalize Shauna's behavior by saying that her husband was infertile and that she wanted to become pregnant. Heather did not make a hasty decision. She had said before that if he were unfaithful, she would leave him immediately. However, she had now changed her mind and did not want to leave the man she had been married to for nearly 10 years. Greeley realized that his situation with Shauna had spiraled out of control. He sought Heather's forgiveness and vowed not to cheat on her again, hoping to save their marriage. They agreed to put the matter aside for the time being. Regardless, Heather could not allow her husband to maintain a relationship with Shauna. Heather felt that her husband needed to resolve this issue as soon as possible and that he had to cut ties with Shauna and the child. After all of this, Heather felt hurt and betrayed by the husband she had trusted. After their encounter, she called her family to express her frustration in detail, hoping to find comfort. Her relatives supported her desire to mend her relationship with her husband. To do this, she planned to seek guidance from a psychologist to help save their family. Greeley had to completely cut off contact with Shauna, even at work. That evening, he called Shauna on speakerphone to break up with her while his wife was present. Shauna was devastated by the breakup and began bombarding Heather with text messages and calls. Her messages included alarming threats and violent images, blaming Heather for her problems and ignoring the fact that she had interfered in someone else's family when Greeley no longer wanted to be with her. Shauna's behavior became increasingly erratic, culminating in a tragic incident on the evening of January 23, 2007. A witness came to the police station after witnessing an attack. Heather initially spoke to her co-workers in the parking lot before walking to their car. Suddenly, a man dressed in black and wearing a mask appeared and approached Heather. The attacker raised a weapon, ordered Heather to her knees, and yelled that Heather had ruined her life. 2 shots were then fired, and Heather was hit and fell to the ground. The dressed in black quickly fled the scene. When police arrived, Heather was unconscious but still breathing. She had head and chest injuries and was in critical condition, so she was taken to the intensive care unit. Tragically, she later died at the hospital. Police quickly identified Heather as the wife of one of their employees. They launched an immediate investigation, beginning with an interview with a witness, a co-worker of Heather's. The witness reported that the attacker was dressed in black, making it difficult to see their faces. The witness was unable to determine the attacker's gender, as it was difficult to tell from a distance whether they were a woman or a man. After the shooting, the attacker quickly left in a pickup truck, but the witness did not see the license plate number. Greeley received a call that day while he was with his daughter, waiting for his wife to return from work. He was shocked by the tragic news, as he never expected something so devastating to happen. He provided the investigation with important clues that could aid in the search. Despite Shauna's suspicious behavior, he could not believe that she would kill Heather. The officers were deeply affected by the incident. They checked Shauna's and Greeley's cars. Based on the description, Shauna's husband Weld's car matched the one the suspect had used to flee. The officers quickly went to their home. When they arrived, Weld spoke to the officers and stated that he had not used his car on the day of the murder, but that Shauna had driven it out several times. They decided to track the pickup truck using surveillance camera footage. The footage showed the truck leaving the crime scene and heading toward a winery located on the edge of town. A driver got out of the truck, dressed entirely in black, and his face was not visible. However, the police noticed an important detail. The driver was barefoot, despite the snow and cold. While checking the area between the two locations, they discovered discarded clothing and shoes that clearly belonged to a man. They quickly tested for gunpowder residue and confirmed its presence at the crime scene, along with tire tracks from the suspect's car. The police suspected that Weld could be a potential suspect. However, he had a solid alibi, as he was working at the time of the attack, which led to increased suspicion of Shauna. The liquor store owner reported that a barefoot woman had come in that evening, and he recognized her as Shauna. When the police spoke to Shauna, she said she had been having a headache all day and had gone out to buy alcohol. In her statement, she explained that when she got to the store, she realized she had forgotten her wallet, which was why she seemed different. Shauna intended to buy alcohol to relieve her headache, but when she got to the store, she had to leave empty-handed because she had no money. When she stepped outside, her husband Weld suddenly appeared and urged her to get out of the pickup, saying that things looked bad. At that point, Shauna's headache intensified and she passed out, not remembering anything until the next morning. Shauna's story lacked credibility, and the police suspected that she was lying. During the investigation, it was discovered that Shauna's friend, Assistant Chief of Police Michelle Moore, had actively helped her. The reason for Michelle's animosity toward Heather is still unclear. According to Michelle's confession, she helped Shauna because she was her best friend. Michelle assisted in planning the attack on Heather and provided advice on how to cover up their actions, almost like a consultation based on her police expertise. They planned and executed the crime in a very clever manner. Both women were arrested and charged with Heather's murder. Michelle Moore received a 10-year prison sentence for her role in the crime. Although she could have faced a much longer sentence, her sentence was significantly reduced due to a plea agreement and her admission of guilt. During the trial, Michelle stated that over the years, she and Shauna had developed a close friendship. Shauna confided in her about her problems, so Michelle was very understanding of the challenges Heather's family faced, especially the troubled relationship between Shauna and Greeley. Throughout these difficult times, Michelle was always there to support Shauna, especially when Greeley contacted Shauna while he was with his wife, calling to break up with her. Initially, Shauna couldn't believe what he said and thought he was just acting. However, she soon realized that the conversation meant Greeley had decided to return to his wife and was no longer interested in Shauna. This finally caused Shauna to lose her temper. She turned back to Michelle. Meanwhile, Shauna manipulated Michelle into turning against Heather. It was clear that Shauna used manipulative tactics with people to get what she wanted. Michelle fell into Shauna's trap and decided to help her. Michelle ended up playing a key role in planning the crime. Thanks to Michelle, Shauna had full access to forensic science resources and expert guidance. Michelle advised Shauna on how to act and how to use the internet to avoid detection. As a result, Shauna quickly stopped making any suspicious online requests, even from her work devices. During questioning, Shauna pretended to be surprised when she was informed of the murder charge, claiming that she had no memory of the shooting. However, there was substantial evidence against her. Prior to the hearing, Shauna was placed behind bars. The trial was moved to a nearby county due to heavy media coverage before the trial and concerns that the jury might already know the details of the case. This move was made to ensure that both the prosecution and defense attorneys were fair. In February 2008, the prosecutor and defense attorney addressed the jury. The prosecution alleged that Shauna had affairs with married police officers. However, it was her obsession with Greeley that stood out. She became so infatuated that she nearly divorced him, became pregnant, and eventually killed his wife, who had separated them. Several witnesses gave compelling testimony. One police officer claimed that Shauna had expressed her deep hatred for Heather, stating that during practice at the shooting range, she had visualized Heather's face as a target. Shauna vehemently denied her guilt and tried to blame others. The prosecutor presented a clear timeline of events, supported by numerous witnesses and evidence. It appeared that Shauna had planned the violent crime in advance and intended to frame her husband, Weld. She used Weld's car and clothes, taken from the laundry basket, which contained his DNA and would help conceal her identity. The prosecution argued that Shauna wanted to remove two obstacles that would prevent her from being with Greeley: her husband and Greeley's wife, Heather Garaus, because her husband might want to divide the assets in a divorce. After some deliberation, the jury found Shauna Nelson guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced her to life in prison without parole. Greeley, who had gained custody of Shauna's daughter after Heather's death. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case: the case of Paul Lambert. The world is full of mysteries, and sometimes danger is closer than we realize. Today's story illustrates how even ordinary events can become a nightmare for someone. Paul Lambert, who was born Paul Scales, was born in 1980 in Queensland, Australia. He had an older sister and several half-siblings from his father's side. When Paul was 4, his parents decided to divorce and agreed that their mother would have custody of the children. Despite facing some challenges during this time, Paul appeared to be a typical child. However, as time went on, his mother began to notice troubling behaviors in him. She took him to a doctor, who diagnosed him with a disorder related to his parents' separation, suggesting that it would improve over time. Unfortunately, several years passed, and Paul's behavior continued to deteriorate. By the time he was 10, his mother was nearly in despair, as her son had become completely uncontrollable. He was diagnosed with multiple conditions, including attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and began treatment that seemed to provide some relief. Despite facing many challenges, Paul excelled in school. In 1998, he graduated from high school and enrolled at the Queensland University of Technology to pursue a degree in business and finance. His intelligence allowed him to succeed with ease. After completing his studies, he obtained a job in the finance department of a motorcycle dealership in North Queensland, where he worked as part of a large team. His co-workers found him charming, articulate, intelligent, and friendly, always ready to assist others. He even helped a colleague raise funds for her daughter's medical treatment. However, that is only a part of his personality that he wants to show to everyone. Although he appeared kind and generous, regularly donating to charities and supporting friends and family, His true nature was known only to his family. In reality, he was a manipulator struggling with mental health issues who refused to seek help. A skilled liar, Paul used his eloquence to achieve his aims, often employing threats of self-harm as a tactic to manipulate others. From 2003 to 2010, Paul had several different girlfriends, all of whom were beautiful. However, a troubling pattern emerged in his relationships. He exhibited extreme aggressive behavior. By the 6th year, 5 different women had obtained restraining orders against him, but even this did not stop him. He violated several of them and was held accountable. Paul treated all his ex-girlfriends similarly. They described him as a manipulator who sought to control their lives in a cruel manner. He frequently belittled them emotionally and even became violent when discussions about breakups arose, creating unsafe conditions for their well-being. Paul had a troubling habit. He would reach out to the families of girls who tried to leave their unsatisfactory relationships. Whenever he sensed that he was losing control, he would repeatedly call the girls' relatives, trying to intimidate and stalk them. His goal was to delay the breakup and keep his latest partner with him for as long as possible. To do this, Paul made up stories and attempted to hide his actions. When the truth came out and difficult conversations started, he often blamed his mental health issues. It seemed he genuinely believed that his disorders could excuse his cruel and irrational behavior. However, the girls and their families insisted that he needed to seek help from a psychiatric clinic. Unfortunately, he did not seek help on his own, and law enforcement did not take action, allowing another girl to fall under his influence. Paul claimed to have dissociative identity disorder, describing his personalities as good and evil and sometimes giving them names. He admitted that he might have as many as 9 different personas. Despite this, Paul was a charismatic individual with a strong ability to charm women. He was attractive, but his idealized relationships quickly fell apart, typically lasting no more than a month. In 2014, he tried to settle down by proposing to his ex-girlfriend Samantha, whom he had dated in 2008. However, their relationship ended due to his aggressive and cruel behavior, which included stalking her, although they remained in contact for 6 years, during which Samantha urged him to seek professional help. Paul managed to persuade her that he could be a good husband and would definitely pursue treatment, leading her to agree to marry him. They officially tied the knot on February 2, 2014. Of course, all his promises turned out to be lies. Initially, things appeared to be going well, but within a few weeks the situation started to deteriorate rapidly. After 7 months of living together, their marriage had become unbearable. Paul was losing control, and Samantha felt ready to end the relationship for good. In a last-ditch effort to save their marriage, she suggested they take a trip together. In September 2014, they traveled to Orlando, Florida, hoping to improve their relationship before returning to Australia. Although the trip seemed romantic and had the potential to mend their relationship, once they returned home, Paul continued his old behavior. Unsurprisingly, the situation only worsened. Then, Paul creates a profile on Tinder, presenting himself in the best possible way. He received messages from many women, but was searching for something truly special. He connected with Brittany Killa, a beautiful and well-known 32-year-old television presenter with a promising future. Brittany was using the app to find a relationship, and Paul quickly caught her attention. They began messaging, then exchanged social media and email contacts, and eventually had several video calls on Skype. Paul is completely captivated by Brittany, to the point where he wants to end his relationship with his wife. In March 2015, Paul informed Brittany that he was going to Florida because he wanted to be with her. By this time, they had developed a good rapport. Brittany had no idea that Paul was hiding significant issues. He was adept at concealing his flaws, and Brittany unwittingly became another victim. When Brittany learned about his divorce, She expressed that she didn't want to be the reason for his family's breakup. She asked Paul to stay in Australia, but he lied, claiming he was already divorced and had no ties holding him back. This convinced Brittany to give him a chance, and she agreed to spend 3 months with him to deepen their connection. Finally, they met in person. Although Paul is not officially divorced, he continued to deceive Brittany. At first, he presented himself as a caring and loving man, but soon, his true nature revealed itself. Brittany noticed his odd and unpredictable behavior, which suggested he was struggling to manage his emotions. As a sensible person, Brittany understood that the relationship should come to an end. Unfortunately, this decision was a clear signal for Paul to take action. He started overwhelming Brittany with messages and calls, insisting she spend the next 3 months with him, as they had initially agreed. He believed she could not simply abandon her commitments, claiming he had traveled across the ocean for her, and felt that she had treated him poorly. But all of this was in vain. Paul could not convince Brittany. Then, Paul began telling her that his father had just died, and he needed support, claiming that Brittany was the only close person he had in the US. Ultimately, this worked. She believed his story, thinking that no one would make up something like that. Her father had died from a brain tumor a few years ago, so she understood how hard it was for him. Paul knew about this and intentionally used this trick to manipulate her to lure Brittany into a trap. She supported him and tried to build their relationship. Of course, this didn't affect his behavior. He became increasingly unstable. So after a while, Brittany decided to cut ties again. Then, Paul began to threaten to take his own life. Unfortunately, this trick worked again, and their relationship continued. What bothered Brittany most was her boyfriend's behavior when she had to work away from home for long hours. He sent her dozens of messages and emails, and could even call her when she was on live air. Naturally, this was a significant problem for the journalist, and could potentially cost her the job she had dedicated her entire life to. Brittany couldn't withstand the pressure and tried to break up with him again. Then he started making up new absurd stories that became increasingly bizarre. Paul started telling her that all this time she had not been dating him, but his twin brother, who was the one behaving inappropriately. This time, Brittany did not believe these stories. Then Paul recounted how he had been abused in childhood, claiming that this had led to his current emotional state. Paul again tried to elicit pity from Brittany in every possible way. This whole lie culminated in he confessing that he had a brain tumor and would soon die. Paul added that he was afraid of dying alone. He was once again convincing enough for Brittany to believe him. All of this led to the continuation of their relationship. But Samantha lived in constant fear. She cried every day, and panic attacks began. During the day, Brittany was so tense that she felt constantly unwell. She planned to exit the relationship again, but Paul was prepared to keep her. He threatened to expose naked photographs of her. Now her career, which she had built her entire conscious life around, was at stake. Paul even started sending threatening messages on Brittany's social media, calling her a killer and hinting that he would take his own life if she broke up with him. As a result, Brittany was forced to delete several of her social media profiles. As a public figure, she needed to manage her social media presence to promote herself. Naturally, Paul was aware of this and willingly used it as a means of control. All of this could not continue indefinitely. Eventually, Brittany left him and contacted the police. Like all the previous women in this period, he actively bombarded her with compromising messages and stalked her wherever he could. She reported all of this to law enforcement, who took the case seriously. On May 11, Brittany sent a text message to Paul, warning him not to stalk her anymore and not to try to contact her through any means of communication. Then Paul sent 2 more letters demanding payment in exchange for stopping his harassment. In reality, Paul earned a decent living from extort money. He was very frugal, drove an old car, and rented a tiny, modest apartment. However, in the following days, Paul still showed no signs of stopping his bullying actions. It seemed he was still trying harder to cling to his victim. During this period, he began talking about his 9 personalities. Brittany was in shock and terrified, as she had never dealt with people suffering from dissociative disorders before. Thanks to Brittany's work through social media and television, Paul was able to easily gather information about her. He followed her through news broadcasts and publications. Paul began showing up near Brittany's home and workplace uninvited, and he was able to intimidate her to the point that it became increasingly difficult for her to go on live broadcasts. During those moments, she couldn't feel calm in front of the camera because of the overwhelming fear. Thanks to the lawyer hired by Brittany, Paul was arrested and charged with stalking and extortion. Eventually, he admitted to stalking but again claimed he was insane. During this time, Brittany learned that all of his stories about twin brothers and tumors were false. His father was actually alive and well. She was shocked by the extent of his deceit. Soon after, Paul was deported to Australia and banned from entering the US. After being forcibly sent back to his home country, he changed his last name to Lambert, his mother's maiden name. This seemed to be his attempt to clear his name, which had been tarnished by legal issues. When Samantha found out about his deportation, she contacted the police because she was worried he might try to come back to her since they were still married. As a result, the police issued a restraining order against Paul from approaching her. Despite this, Paul continued to harass her with calls and messages, but she chose not to respond. On February 22, 2016, Paul persuaded Samantha to go with him to a divorce lawyer to sign the divorce papers. She agreed, which turned out to be a grave mistake. During the ride, he began to insult her and threatened to crash the car so they could die together. When Samantha asked to be let out, Paul suddenly sped up, and in the panic, he hit her in the face. Fortunately, she managed to escape from the car and call the police. Paul was subsequently arrested and charged with kidnapping and assault. They finalized their divorce on June 19 of that same year, and Paul faced a Queensland court where he was sentenced to 10 months in prison. However, he was released on parole shortly after. Following his release, he was placed on 12 months of probation and had his driver's license suspended for 2 years. A few months later, he broke the terms of his parole again by moving to another state in Australia and starting a new job without informing his parole officer. Initially, law enforcement was unaware of his actions. Each time he was supposed to check in, he flew from state to state, pretending to live his previous life. It was later discovered that he had much more serious problems than simple depression. From August 2015 to May 2016, he attended numerous therapy sessions with a psychologist. During this time, his behavioral issues also came to the attention of psychiatrists. Although Paul was prescribed several medications, he refused to take them and eventually stopped seeing the specialist altogether. Shortly after his divorce from Samantha, Paul began using his favorite dating app and quickly met a new woman. This woman was Angela J., a 28-year-old doctor who had just finished her residency and worked at a hospital in Sydney, located hundreds of kilometers away from him in another state. Angela was also looking for a life partner after her own difficult divorce. Upon meeting Paul, she felt an immediate connection. They went on their first date, followed by several more, during which Paul acted calmly to win her over. Angela noticed they had a lot in common and eventually invited him to meet her family. While she seemed genuinely happy, her father sensed something was wrong within minutes of meeting Paul. He warned his daughter that this man would bring trouble, but sadly, his warning went unheeded. Angela and Paul had an agreement. She would focus on her career and not be disturbed during the weekdays while working at the hospital, and they would meet on weekends. Initially, everything went well, but soon Angela began to feel uneasy. She sensed that someone was watching her, and discovered that someone had entered her home without permission while she was at work. Paul started to act increasingly provocatively, prompting Angela to end the relationship. When she shared this news, Paul cried and resorted to his usual tactic of threatening self-harm. When she tried to set boundaries, Paul revealed that he had a personality disorder. He escalated the situation by inventing a fake friend named Dan, buying a phone for this imaginary friend, and using Dan to manipulate Angela further, claiming that he was end his life due to her desire to break up. This made Angela feel guilty. Eventually, she agreed to spend some time with him, feeling pressured by her professional ethics as a doctor who wanted to help. Angela made it clear that she only wanted to support his recovery and did not wish to pursue a romantic relationship, which seemed to satisfy Paul. Then, Angela had invited him to a reunion, and when they met, she reiterated that they were just friends. Throughout the evening, Paul acted unpredictably, even stealing Angela's handbag with all her belongings. After several hours of persuasion from some of Angela's friends, her property was finally returned. Angela's sister came to her aid just in time and helped her escape. By morning, the sisters reached out to the police because they had received threatening messages overnight. Initially, the police did not take action, even though they were aware of multiple similar crimes committed by Paul. He had violated 5 restraining orders and the terms of his parole, along with committing various other offenses. The next day, Paul rented a white Corolla hatchback and went to a hardware store to buy a utility knife, an axe, and 2 rolls of tape. While driving, he was pulled over for speeding, but it is more of a routine document check. He was driving illegally since his license was still suspended, but he managed to convince the officer that he was unaware of the restrictions. Surprisingly, the officer let him go. That evening, Paul met Angela at her doorstep, right after she returned from visiting her sister. Once inside, Angela received a frightening message from Paul. Alarmed, Angela ran to her neighbors for help, fearing that Paul might come for her. They assisted her and called the police. Help arrived at her home around 9 p.m., and Angela was taken to the police station. After explaining the situation regarding Paul, a criminal case was opened. Following the police's advice, Angela decided to stay with her relatives for safety. She asked the landlord to change all the locks. To protect herself, she kept knives all over her house so she can quickly defend myself in case of attack. Meanwhile, Paul was near her house, hiding from the police and attempting to buy a weapon. Paul went to a weapon shop but was unable to purchase one due to his suspended license. Later, he returned and asked to buy a hunting knife, which he was given. That same day, he rented a room in a hotel directly across from the hospital where Angela worked. After that, he sent a message to the entire family saying he was going to end his life. However, his relatives, who had tried to help him for many years, were exhausted by his constant lies and stopped responding to such comments. On November 2, Paul returned to the hardware store and bought a crowbar, a hammer, and several zip ties. When Angela came home in the evening and went to her bedroom, Paul suddenly jumped out of the closet and attacked her with a knife. He covered her mouth with his hand, leaving her unable to fight back. However, Angela managed to stall him by asking to go to the bathroom. Terrified, she decided to try to escape. Unfortunately, Paul quickly caught up with her and began stabbing her. The first strikes hit her legs, followed by 11 wounds to her chest and arms. Despite her injuries, Angela somehow managed to get up. Paul then poured gasoline on her and even into her mouth, but she refused to give up and screamed for help. Fortunately, a neighbor walking his dog heard her cries. Realizing what was happening, the neighbor grabbed a crowbar from his work vehicle and rushed to her aid. Angela seized the opportunity to slip out of Paul's grasp, causing him to slip on a puddle and fall. This gave her crucial seconds to escape, and the neighbor helped her reach his house, where his wife called for help and tended to her bleeding wounds as instructed by Angela. Finally, Angela was taken to the hospital, and the police began searching for Paul. However, he had already disappeared by that time. Remarkably, around 7:05 a.m., while Angela was being transported to the hospital, Paul called her. Instead of speaking with her, he only heard the furious shouts of the neighbor who had rescued her. Paul hung up and called his mother. During this call, he told her he intended to take his own life and asked her to apologize to Angela on his behalf. She didn't believe him and hung up. He then called the police, speaking about harming all the women he had known. He claimed he couldn't control himself and that they would be in danger as long as he was alive. The police tried to convince him to turn himself in, but he simply hung up. Thanks to this call, the police were able to track Paul's location. He was traveling along the eastern coast of Australia. A chase began at 9:15, but Paul was driving so recklessly that the police had to stop the pursuit. They set up spike strips on the road, which successfully halted his vehicle. Paul exited the rented car with a knife and ran down the road until he encountered 3 officers. Although the officers had their weapons drawn, Paul showed no intention of surrendering. He was blinded by a powerful flashlight, which only made him more aggressive. Meanwhile, the police attempted to negotiate with him, urging him to give up, but he seemed intent on dying. Paul even shouted, asking what he needed to do for the officers to open fire. They attempted to calm and distract him, but one of the police officers approached from behind and fired a taser. Unfortunately, the taser failed to make contact because Paul was wearing thick clothing. This infuriated Paul, who then menaced the officers with a knife. Suddenly, multiple explosions rang out from all directions. At 9:37, 36-year-old Paul was shot and killed. His wife was informed of the incident, but she was unable to cry or feel upset. Angela was in the hospital at the time. She had been saved and was not in danger of losing her life despite suffering 11 stab wounds. Upon hearing that Paul could no longer harm anyone, Angela felt a sense of relief. Many women who had been victims of stalking experienced varying degrees of depression and post-traumatic stress, but ultimately, they all managed to rehabilitate and recover. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of Tony Alexander King. Rocio Juaninkov Hornos was born in 1979 in Spain and was the youngest of 3 siblings. Their parents divorced when Rocio was very young, and the children remained with their mother. Her mother, Alicia Hornos, raised her and her 2 older siblings, Rosa and Guillermo, in the town of Millas. Rocio was described as an angelic child. She had a positive outlook on life and was adept at finding solutions to challenges. She cared deeply for her mother and siblings. At that time, Rocio was also in a relationship with a boy who, according to many, loved her very much. However, everything changed on October 9, 1999. That day, Rocio spent the day and evening at her boyfriend's house, where his mother was also present. They decided to go to a fair in Fuengirola, a nearby village. Later that evening, around 9:30 p.m., Rocio chose to leave her boyfriend's house, saying she wanted to go home to shower and change before going to the fair. It was only a 500-meter walk back to her house, but something happened during her walk, and she never returned home. Rocio's mother thought her daughter had gone to the fair with her boyfriend or friends, so she didn't raise the alarm when Rocio didn't come home. Rosa and Guillermo were also waiting for Rocio at home, but hadn't heard from her either. When Rocio still hadn't returned by the next morning, Alicia became anxious. Alicia called Rocio's boyfriend. He said he hadn't seen Rocio and confirmed that they had planned to go to the fair, but that at the last moment, he fell asleep and didn't go anywhere. He mentioned that he had tried to call Rocio, but acquaintances said they hadn't seen her at the fair. He thought she had come home late and was very tired. Alicia was very worried because there had been no news about her daughter. Her anxiety grew until her partner Juan Chirillo suggested they take a walk to relieve some stress. He planned to show her some nearby ruins, hoping it would help her relax. Many people had reassured them that their daughter would return soon. As they walked, everything seemed normal, until Alicia spotted a pair of sneakers on the ground. She believed they belonged to her daughter. Continuing through the vacant lot, she became increasingly alarmed when she saw bloodstains and a piece of fabric. Feeling agitated, Alicia was convinced that something terrible had happened, so Juan called the police for assistance. The police arrived and secured the area to search for evidence. In addition to the sneakers, bloodstains, and fabric, they discovered tire tracks that had crossed over a puddle of blood, as well as a cigarette butt from a brand not commonly found in Spain. After analyzing the evidence, they found that the DNA from the cigarette butt did not match any records in the database, but they preserved the sample for future testing. The tire tracks indicated that the car involved was quite old and had not been made in Spain for 6 years. It was also determined to be a small vehicle. Since Rocio had practically vanished in the middle of the night, it was very difficult to find witnesses, especially since the area was not crowded. However, the first witness came forward after the evidence was collected. He was a taxi driver who reported that on the night of Rocio's disappearance, around 10 p.m., he was driving home from work and passed by the street where the evidence was found. He heard screams and became very scared, so he closed the windows of his car. The taxi driver also noticed a man inside an SUV and was able to provide a description of the man, which was used to create a composite sketch. The photo sketch was disseminated across all media outlets, so that people could provide information about this man if they knew anything. At the same time, the police were searching for this person in the nearby grove. In cases like this, the last person to see the victim, especially if they were a romantic partner, often becomes the main suspect. In this instance, that person was Jose Antonio Rios. The police examined his phone and interrogated him 6 times. His account raised suspicions for several reasons, one being that he couldn't recall what the victim was wearing that day. The victim's family provided information that contradicted Jose's statements. They stated that she was wearing a white t-shirt with a Nike logo and purple pants, but Jose insisted he had never seen her in that outfit. He claimed he was unfamiliar with the white t-shirt. Additionally, Jose's mother confirmed that the victim had been wearing a jacket when she left their house at 9:30 p.m. and she had helped fasten it on her. Jose's family was taken aback to find that the jacket was still at their home, suggesting that Rocio must have returned to Jose's house in different clothing that day. Jose insisted on his original account. When Rocio went her home, he fell asleep and he didn't know anything else. The location where the evidence was discovered was very close to Jose's house. If the girl had been screaming, as the taxi driver stated, Jose should have heard her since he lived on the lower floor. He claimed he didn't hear anything, and neither did his family. There was no way to verify his alibi as he claimed to have been sleeping at home. Only his parents and a few relatives could confirm that. It was also odd that he didn't offer to take his girlfriend home at such a late hour, even though they could have gone to the fair together. No suspicious calls were found on his phone, leading the investigators to halt further questioning. He appeared in various media outlets to talk about Rocio, expressing hope for her return and participating in the search efforts. The search for Rocio included all nearby areas, with the central zone being where the evidence was found. Alicia suspected that the attack might have occurred there, and there were concerns that Rocio could be seriously injured or even dead. They searched within a 75-kilometer radius of the location where the evidence was discovered. Alicia appeared on television, pleading for assistance in finding her daughter. In her desperation, Alicia consulted several mediums, all of whom claimed that her daughter was still alive. The search continued tirelessly until November 2, 1999. Unfortunately, that day ended in tragedy when police and family members discovered Rocio. She was found deceased near Los Altos del Rodeo Sports Club. The property included a lot with a tennis court, where Rocio's body was located. She was found under a tree by the owners of the court. Rocio was naked and had sustained stab wounds, burns, and significant damage to her body from lying beneath the tree for an extended period. The level of decomposition was so advanced that her identity could not be determined through physical features, and she was ultimately recognized by the jewelry she had been wearing that day. The autopsy determined that Rocio died on the same day she went missing. She had 9 stab wounds in various areas of her body, with marks from the weapon on her bones. Her throat had also been cut. 2 tied garbage bags were found near her body, suggesting that she had been transported to the location by car. These bags likely served to prevent blood from staining the trunk. The investigators believed that the perpetrator did not leave her there on the day of her disappearance, but rather several days later. Investigators discovered a badge next to the body. However, the badge had no name on it and therefore provided no useful information. The autopsy revealed that all 9 stab wounds were made with the same weapon, likely a pocket knife. 8 of these wounds were clustered on her back, indicating that she might have been unconscious or already dead when they were inflicted. The remaining wound on her front, like the 8 on her back, affected vital organs and contributed to her death. Additionally, pink fabric fibers were found at the scene. Besides, another bag was discovered at the crime scene containing her clothing. This bag held a hair that did not belong to Rocio, as it was dark, while she had blonde hair. Although this bag, along with the badge and fabric fibers found on the body, could have aided investigators, they were not useful at that time. The hair was rootless, and the technology then available could not analyze DNA without a root. The fabric fibers, identified as clothing fibers, could not be analyzed either. They needed to be compared with the suspect's clothing, and the samples would have to match exactly for the evidence to be significant. The only helpful item for the police was the clothing found in the bag, including a well-known white t-shirt. This t-shirt had traces that supported the theory that Rocio died from stab wounds and confirmed the number of wounds inflicted. A few weeks prior, 4 police officers noticed a car with multiple passengers while patrolling the area where Rocio later went missing. When they checking the license plate, they found that the car belonged to Dolores Vasquez. Dolores and Alicia have been in a romantic lesbian relationship for 10 years. Initially, their relationship was happy, and they bought a house where they lived with Alicia's children. However, issues arose as the children grew older. Dolores took on the role of disciplinarian and was much stricter than Alicia preferred. Dolores often criticized and punished the children severely, leading to frequent arguments between the couple. Ultimately, they decided to separate because their relationship had become unhappy. Even after the separation and Alicia moving out of their shared home, Dolores remained a significant figure in her life. Alicia, Rocio's mother, lacked higher education and struggled to find a well-paying job, which led to financial challenges for the family. Meanwhile, Dolores held a high-status job and provided substantial financial support to them. She often expressed her love for Alicia's children as if they were her own, particularly for Rocio, whom she practically raised. Dolores was instrumental in the efforts to find Rocio and also contributed financially to the investigation. As the investigation progressed, the police initially had several suspects, but that number gradually decreased. Almost a year after Rocio's death, in September 2000, the first arrest occurred. Dolores was taken into custody as the sole suspect. Dolores's arrest was initially controversial, as the police had no clear evidence linking her to the crime. Some initial clues led them to suspect that the real culprit might be a man, as suggested by a sketch provided by the only witness, a taxi driver. However, the police focused on Dolores, believing that she was motivated by a recent breakup with Alicia Hornos, Rocio's mother. They suspected that Dolores may have acted out of resentment. There were even rumors that Rocio played a role in the breakup, as her relationship with Dolores was said to be strained. These assumptions became the justification for Dolores's arrest. After the detention, one of Spain's most publicized and controversial trials began. Dolores was interrogated for several hours, but consistently maintained her innocence. Earlier, evidence suggesting her involvement had emerged. Pink fabric fibers found on Rocio's body were compared to Dolores's athletic clothing. Laboratory analysis indicated a near-perfect match, confirming that the fibers came from Dolores's clothing. This initial analysis was conducted by a toxicological laboratory, and the police announced the findings at a press conference, leading to a shift in public opinion against Dolores. However, at her attorney's request, a second analysis was conducted at a forensic laboratory. This time, the result was negative. Dolores's defense argued that the initial laboratory might have made an error. The case received widespread media coverage, and everyone had something to say about the actual findings of the police or Dolores's family life. Discussions arose suggesting that Dolores harbored deep-seated resentment towards Rocio. The trial commenced in 2001, and multiple testimonies revealed a very strained relationship between Dolores and Rocio. Alicia testified that Dolores often punished Rocio harshly, restricted her from leaving the house for many years, and frequently yelled at her. As a result, Rocio struggled academically, leading to further reprimands from Dolores, intensifying their conflicts. Alicia recalled a specific moment when Rocio expressed her fears, saying, "Mom, one day she is going to kill me, and you will do nothing." Rosa also shared her experiences of humiliation at the hands of Dolores. Initially, this behavior stemmed from Dolores's education. Unlike Alicia, who could read and write but had no formal qualifications, Dolores's education set her apart. Dolores often introduced Alicia as her sister to friends and acquaintances, rarely acknowledging her as a partner to anyone outside their close circle. This led Alicia to feel that Dolores no longer loved her or her family. A few months prior to the incident, Dolores had threatened Alicia because she refused to rekindle their relationship. Alicia was already with someone else. Alicia told Dolores that their romantic involvement was over, but Alicia was open to being friends and would offer help if needed. In response, she ominously warned Alicia, "You will cry bloody tears. You will be in pain." However, there was no evidence to show that Dolores was physically at the crime scene or had approached Rocio's body. The available evidence may suggest the guilt of someone else, rather than that of Dolores. Despite this, she was labeled guilty based on the evidence presented in court. The police suspected that Rocio knew her attacker. They believed this individual had given her a cloth to use on her wound after inflicting the first injury to the front of her body. However, when Rocio attempted to escape, the attacker, in a fit of rage, inflicted additional wounds to her back. The numerous wounds indicated a level of hatred and cruelty. One piece of evidence was a badge. Dolores participated in the searches, so she could have had access to these badges. Additionally, the testimonies of Dolores's employees came into play, indicating that Dolores was anxious and irritable on the days surrounding Rocio's disappearance. One employee reported that on the day Rocio's body was found, Dolores took a picture of her and began stabbing it with a knife, ultimately destroying the photo. Dolores claimed this was because the employee's Spanish was poor and she wanted to explain what had happened to Rocio. Meanwhile, the police have not released information about how Rocio was killed. An employee reported that on the day of the incident, Dolores shouted about a problem. Another piece of evidence against Dolores is that she usually took daily walks with a friend from Ukraine between 9 and 10 o'clock in the evening. However, on the day Rocio disappeared, Dolores did not meet with her friend and canceled their plans. Additionally, it was discovered that Dolores's phone was tapped, revealing a conversation in which she stated, "They have nothing." The police questioned her friends and family, prompting many to contact Dolores to check on her and ask what to say to the authorities. It became clear to the police that Dolores was confident she would not be caught, believing they had no evidence against her. However, Dolores's defense countered each point made by the prosecution. They presented a record of Dolores's phone calls from that day, both of which were lengthy. If she made her first call at 22:34 and the taxi driver heard Rocio scream around 10 p.m., it would have been impossible for Dolores to arrive, commit the murder, dispose of the body, and then make those calls in such a short time frame. Furthermore, when Dolores called her friends and family, none reported that she seemed nervous or acted unusually. Everything appeared normal. As a result, some evidence was dismissed. The defense also aimed to disprove the significance of a tire track found at the scene. The track belonged to an old car, while Dolores drove a newer Toyota with different tires. The prosecution suggested that Dolores could have rented a car, but this was deemed unlikely. Where could she have rented a car at 10 or 11 p.m.? Rental services would have logged such an unusual request, yet the prosecution had no proof that Dolores rented a vehicle. There was also a theory that she borrowed a car from a neighbor who left their keys in the car, but this idea was considered too far-fetched to be taken seriously. The DNA found on the cigarette butt belonged to a man. The taxi driver testified that he saw a man near the garbage bags containing Rocio's body. Fingerprints on the bags did not match those of Dolores, meaning there was no evidence to prove she was at the crime scene. The only accusation against her was a possible desire for revenge. Additionally, Dolores was known to be psychologically unstable, unfriendly, and often in a bad mood. This was a jury trial. The verdict was delivered not by the judge, but by the jury. The jury was composed of 9 members who deliberated for several hours. The decision was not unanimous, reflecting 7 votes in favor and 2 against. A few months into the trial, Dolores was found guilty of intentionally murdering Rocio Wonenkoff and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Here's what the police believe happened on October 9, 1999. Around 9:30 p.m., Rocio left her boyfriend's house to go home, intending to take a shower and change. While walking home, she encountered Dolores. They began to argue and the situation escalated. Dolores pulled out a knife and stabbed Rocio in the front. After injuring Rocio, Dolores nervously handed her a handkerchief to stop the bleeding. Fearing that Rocio would report her to the police, Dolores chased after her when she tried to flee. Rocio, weakened by her injuries, fell, and Dolores then stabbed her 8 more times. After confirming that Rocio was dead, Dolores placed her body in her car. To keep the interior clean, she wrapped the body in 2 plastic bags. For several days, she concealed the body while participating in the search for Rocio and giving interviews. Eventually, she moved the body to the location where it was later discovered. Dolores initially served her prison sentence, but in 2002, an appeal was filed on her behalf. The appeal was successful, leading to a new trial being scheduled. While Dolores awaited her second trial, both the defense and prosecution prepared to present new evidence. However, an unexpected event caused the trial to be postponed. In August 2003, a 17-year-old girl named Sonia Carabantes went missing from her village after the holidays. Sonia and her family had moved to Malaga after living in Switzerland for a while. As days passed without any news about Sonia, the police worked diligently to locate her. This situation reminded many people of the case of Rocio, as both girls were of similar ages and had similar builds. Tragically, Sonia's fate mirrored that of Rocio. On August 19, 2003, Sonia's body was discovered. She had been strangled and had multiple stab wounds. 2 days after the body was found, on August 21, an autopsy was conducted. During the examination, genetic material was discovered under the victim's nails. This material was identified as skin, indicating that the girl had struggled with her attacker. This evidence could help the police identify the murderer. A DNA sample was taken, analyzed, and entered into the database. The DNA under Sonia's nails matched 100% with DNA found on cigarette butts, linked to Dolores Vasquez from a few years prior. This was puzzling because the person suspected of killing Sonia was already in prison. This means that it is clear that someone else killed both girls. This information was beneficial for Dolores's defense, essentially clearing her of all charges. As a result, there was an increasing belief that Dolores was innocent. One woman stated that her ex-husband, Tony Alexander King, had been acting suspiciously around the time of Rocio's disappearance. She mentioned that he had scratches on his hands were swollen, and he brought home bloody clothes, claiming he had been injured in an accident. On the day Sonia disappeared, Tony visited her in a state of agitation, sweating, and with scratches on his body. When she asked him what had happened, he told her he had gotten into a fight outside a bar, but she found his explanation unconvincing. Tony was a British man living in Spain, near where the crimes took place. At the time, he was going through a divorce and had a child. The type of cigarettes found at the crime scene was Tony's favorite brand, which is rare in Spain. Tony was arrested on September 19, 2003. During the investigation, his DNA was collected, and the results confirmed a match with a cigarette butt and a sample found under Sonia's nails. After his arrest, details about his troubled past surfaced. Tony Alexander King, originally named Anthony Bromwich, was born in 1967. In 1986, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for attacking several women. Additionally, he had been previously arrested for armed robbery. He served only half of his sentence before being released early for good behavior. Following his release, he changed his name and moved to Spain to start anew. In Spain, he met a woman named Cecilia Matilde Pantoja, and they had a daughter together, also named Sabrina. The Rocio family suspected that even if Dolores didn't commit the crime herself, she was somehow involved. They attended the court hearings for Tony. In 2005, Tony Alexander King was sentenced to 36 years in prison for the death of Sonia Carabantes, and an additional 7 years for an unrelated abuse assault he committed. The trial of Tony Alexander King in connection with the murder of Rocio Waninkoff, which took place in 2006. Initially, Tony claimed he had burned Rocio's body, which contradicted the official account. Although Rocio's body showed signs of burns and fire damage, it was not completely incinerated as Tony had stated. However, during the trial, Tony changed his story completely. He accused 2 individuals, Robert and Dolores, of being involved in the crime. He mentioned that he did not know Dolores well, but that they had a mutual friend, Robert. Tony explained that on October 9, 1999, he went to Robert's house to drink and do banned substance. After a while, he started feeling sick, and then Dolores arrived with another man. He alleged that Robert hypnotized him, and the next thing he remembered was sitting in a car with Robert and Dolores. Tony claimed that in the shadows of the car, Dolores attacked Rocio from behind. He said they placed Rocio in the trunk without realizing Rocio was still alive. Later, Robert got out of the car to check on Rocio. They then wrapped the body in bags to prevent any stains in the car. Tony insisted that he had minimal involvement and portrayed himself as merely a witness to a terrible crime. He is claiming that he left a cigarette butt at the scene. In the second trial, the defense pointed out that the car found at the crime scene was not Tony's car. There was an emerging belief that Tony was not acting alone. When asked why he had not mentioned this during his police arrest, he stated that Dolores had threatened to kill his daughter if he spoke up. On December 14, 2006, the trial ended, and the jury took 13 hours to deliberate. Tony King was convicted of the intentional murder of Rocio, while all charges against Robert were dismissed. Tony was sentenced to 19 years in prison and ordered to pay two compensations, €200,000 to Rocio's mother and €42,000 to her brother and sister. Dolores was released due to the lack of evidence to convict her for her involvement in Rocio's murder. This was a new version of the crime. One night, Tony approached a girl walking home and began to assault and intimidate her. He grabbed her by the neck and pushed her to the location where the evidence was later found. The girl fought back, and he stabbed her in the chest. During the struggle, Rocio managed to unmask him and attempted to flee, but he realized he had gone too far. None of his previous victims had escaped or sustained such severe injuries. After Rocio collapsed, he repeatedly stabbed her in the back until she was no longer breathing. He left her body there for several hours before returning in a car. It is believed that he had the accomplice who helped him load the body into the vehicle. For several days he kept the body with him before disposing of it where it was ultimately found. After the trial, Dolores moved to London and was granted compensation for the months she spent in prison. Many believe that the case cannot be considered closed, as there are still people who assisted Tony. Some think that those individuals could have included Dolores. The families of Rocio and Sonia suffered the loss of daughters who can never return. This case is quite complex, with many developments, particularly in Rocio's case. It remains uncertain whether a single DNA sample found on a cigarette butt was sufficient to place all the blame on Tony. Meanwhile, the Rocio family believes that Dolores played a role in the crime, even if she did not directly kill Rocio. The first test suggested that fibers from Dolores's clothing were found, but a subsequent test contradicted that finding. There is no concrete evidence against her. Unfortunately, without solid evidence, we can only theorize. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Pamela Mastropietro. Pamela Mastropietro was born on August 23, 1999 in Rome, Italy. From a young age, she struggled with anxiety and gullibility. She had trouble interacting with her peers, and family issues only made things more challenging for her. However, in these difficult circumstances, she gradually began to find her strength again. As she grew older, Pamela exhibited some unusual behaviors. She faced emotional instability and had difficulties in school, even though she was intelligent. Over time, her self-esteem was severely affected, causing many difficulties in her life. Eventually, she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. She hung out with a bad group of friends who introduced her to alcohol. Pamela quickly became addicted to alcohol, because under the influence of this drink, she felt freer and lighter, temporarily forgetting her problems. Pamela's parents are very worried and want to help their daughter. But they cannot focus entirely on her because they have to work a lot. As a result, Pamela began to face more serious issues. Although she initially managed to address some of her problems, things took a turn for the worse when she met a 20-year-old man from Romania. This relationship raised red flags from the start. Unlike her previous friends, this new relationship led Pamela to engage in regular substance use. She ignored her family's advice, and their worries soon became a reality. Pamela used substances only when she was with her boyfriend, but after a few months, he vanished, leaving her to deal with her problems alone. The situation worsened and led to a critical condition. Fortunately, her parents acted promptly. On October 18, 2017, 18 years old, Pamela was admitted to a rehabilitation center in Macerata for 3 months. Her parents, Alessandra Verni and Stefano Mastropietro, were shocked when they learned about their daughter's problem. They tried to help her in every way and hoped that after her stay at the center, she would return to a normal life. They believed that the center would closely monitor patients and restrict access to drugs. However, they were mistaken. In fact, she was only partially restricted and could leave the center at any time, despite the curfew. According to Pamela, she felt more comfortable there because there were other people going through similar situations. This made it easier for her to find understanding and support. On January 31, 2018, photos of Pamela surfaced in the media, just hours after her disappearance. At that time, she was in the final stage of a rehabilitation program and had developed friendships with the staff and other young residents at the facility. These friends were among the first individuals the police contacted after her parents reported her missing. They said Pamela's situation was worrying, suggesting she was struggling with addiction and her condition had deteriorated. Unfortunately, completing a rehabilitation program is unlikely to bring about positive change. Meanwhile, Pamela's parents reached out to several television channels to report their daughter's disappearance, urging the public for assistance and offering a reward for information. Concerns were mounting, especially as the police had not found Pamela in the 2 days since she was reported missing. A witness reported seeing 2 suitcases with a foul odor dumped next to a ditch near a house on Promyślenie Street, a few kilometers from where Pamela lived. When the police arrived and examined the suitcases, they discovered the body parts of a young woman inside. DNA testing confirmed that the remains belonged to Pamela Mastropietro, and one of the suitcases was identified as hers. Pamela's parents heard the shocking news on the radio, but couldn't believe it until law enforcement officers visited them in the evening to share the tragic discovery. Her mother was extremely distressed. She had always hoped her daughter would overcome her struggles and achieve her dreams. Now those hopes were shattered. Police later discovered that Pamela had spent her final days at a rehabilitation center. This is where their investigation began. According to people at the rehabilitation center, Pamela had made plans to meet someone and intended to leave. Security cameras confirmed that she left the center in the evening, carrying a suitcase and possibly attempting to escape with her belongings. No one attempted to stop her. After leaving, she went to a nearby train station, where she was again caught on camera getting into a car with a local taxi driver, Lucky Awalima. The driver, a 45-year-old man from a neighboring area, reported that he had taken her to the station after she missed her train to Rome. He dropped her off and left, unaware of what happened to her afterward. Pamela then decided to contact another taxi driver, who was also later approached by the police. In a rush, he agreed to help her and took her to his home. The next morning, she missed her chance to board the train, so instead she requested a ride to a park in Macerata. There, she encountered a drug dealer from Nigeria named Desmond Lucky. The police spoke to him, and he said that Pamela had paid him with a silver necklace her mother had given her. After meeting with Desmond, she left the park and went to a pharmacy a few streets away. The pharmacist reported that she entered the store with a suitcase and purchased a syringe. Security cameras captured her image. Video footage showed a man following her, later identified as Innocent Osagale, a 30-year-old Nigerian citizen who had been in Italy illegally since 2014. He had recently dropped out of a refugee aid program and had become involved in drug trafficking. This made him the main suspect in Pamela's disappearance and other crimes. Investigators feared she may have left with him, possibly intending to buy and use illegal drugs. The police quickly located Innocent's residence, which was just a few streets from the pharmacy. The Carabinieri arrived at Innocent's apartment but did not find him. Then, using luminol, they discovered more blood and clothing that matched the last clothes Pamela wore. Authorities believe both Pamela and Innocent were under the influence of substances. It is thought that he experienced a seizure and attacked her. A forensic report revealed disturbing details, with Innocent apparently attempting to destroy his DNA by thoroughly washing Pamela's dismembered body with bleach. The condition of the remains was so poor that it delayed the determination of the cause of death. He was unsuccessful in disposing of the suitcases containing the bodies. He was captured on surveillance cameras outside a nearby building. It was also discovered that he was not alone during this time. He arrived in a car with a taxi driver friend. This led to an expanded list of suspects. Subsequently, Desmond Lucky and Lucky Awalima were arrested on suspicion of being involved in the crime. Both were in the car Innocent appeared in, carrying suitcases, but they denied knowing about the body inside. Innocent was tracked down and arrested a few hours later. However, he consistently denied attacking Pamela, claiming that she died from a drug overdose. He stated that he handled the body out of fear of legal trouble and deportation. He believed that the quickest and most discreet way to dispose of the body was to put it in separate suitcases and throw them away. However, the police did not find his explanation credible. Pamela's parents have tried their best to refute bad rumors related to their daughter. They argued that Pamela's actions were influenced by her borderline personality disorder, which made it difficult for her to control her behavior. This led to bad habits and erratic actions. On her social media pages, she repeatedly stated that she was ready to quit prohibited substances when her real life improved, which she believed could be achieved with the help of others. However, during the investigation, it was revealed that she frequently left the rehabilitation center to seek out prohibited substances. At that time, items and bloodstains found in Innocent's house were tested in a lab, confirming they belonged to Pamela. Initially, Innocent denied any involvement in the incident, claiming that Pamela died from an overdose. He admitted to offering her drugs, but did not explain how she paid for them. Innocent also denied abusing her, but many did not believe him. Unfortunately, there was no way to confirm or disprove his claims, as the remains had been thoroughly cleaned, leaving no evidence. When asked about his friends, Desmond and Awalima, who were with him during the disposal of the body, Innocent gave very strange information. He stated that on the day of Pamela's death, these friends were at his house. He claimed he did not see anyone attack her and that he passed out during the party. When he woke up, Pamela was with him. This account contradicted his earlier claim that Pamela had died from an overdose. Additionally, bloodstains found at the scene contradict Innocent's claims. It is clear that Pamela was abused and murdered, making Innocent's testimony unreliable. Awalima and Desmond, who were also experienced drug dealers, were detained but denied any involvement from the start. They claimed they were not at Innocent's house during the murder and provided an alibi. However, it took a long time to verify this alibi, and they remained in jail as witnesses to support their claims could not be located. Investigators then reviewed call recordings and tracked the locations of Awalima and Desmond. It turned out that neither of them were at Innocent's house at the time of the murder. They were selling prohibited substance in another part of the city. As a result, the murder charges against them were dropped, but questions about their involvement in hiding evidence, and the body remained. Meanwhile, Innocent maintained that Pamela had died from an overdose and that he had no part in her murder. However, a forensic expert discovered 2 deep stab wounds to Pamela's liver. Given the nature of these injuries, it is suspected that they were inflicted intentionally to kill her, rather than as a result of handling the body. There were reasons to suspect that Innocent had abused Pamela while she was unconscious, which contributed to the tragic incident that followed. A toxicology report revealed that Pamela had a high level of illegal substances in her bloodstream. A forensic expert noted that this level should have rendered her unconscious at the time of her death, but it was unclear if the amount could have caused her death. However, detectives suspect he took advantage of Pamela, drugging her until she passed out and taking advantage of her while she was dealing with addiction and mental health issues. The case had a new lead when, while Awalima and Desmond were in custody, they discussed the incident that occurred at Innocent's house. Their conversations were recorded, and they talked about how Innocent had abused a girl who was unconscious on the couch. Despite the evidence, Innocent maintained that he did not kill Pamela, but expressed remorse to her family for his role in her accidental death. He claimed she died from an overdose, a statement that her parents found insulting. Innocent acknowledged that after Pamela's death, Awalima and Desmond continued to fabricate stories. By February 2019, a hearing was set to resolve Pamela's murder. At this point, investigations had established Innocent as the central figure in the prosecution's case. While in prison, Innocent revealed details of what had happened to Pamela to fellow inmates. According to one inmate, Innocent met Pamela in a park in Macerata, a known area for illegal activities. He quickly realized she was too trusting and carefree, which led him to exploit her naivety. Innocent quickly convinced Pamela to accompany him to his home, where he intended to use a prohibited substance. On their way, they stopped at a pharmacy so Pamela could purchase a disposable syringe. Innocent later confessed that when she lost consciousness from the use of the prohibited substance, he began to abuse her. However, one injection was not enough to knock her out, and she eventually woke up and tried to fight back. When Pamela threatened to report him to the police, Innocent became frightened, realizing he could face serious legal consequences. In a panic, he and his accomplice attacked her liver, causing her to lose a lot of blood and become unconscious again. Finally, he took steps to handle her body. A forensic expert later confirmed that Pamela had been severely injured and had died. The main witness for the prosecution provided statements that were supported by physical evidence and the testimony of a forensic expert, which was another blow to Pamela's family. Her mother had held on to the hope that her daughter had not suffered, but it was revealed that her death was both horrific and painful. A crucial piece of evidence against Innocent was skin found under Pamela's fingernails. She had fought back and scratched him, and he was unable to completely remove the evidence with bleach. Forensic analysis confirmed that the skin belonged to Innocent, indicating that there had been a struggle between them rather than a sudden death. Additionally, the testimony of Awalima, who had also been under investigation, was presented. He claimed that during the attack he received a call from Innocent. During the call, he heard the sounds of a woman crying and moaning in the background. Innocent had asked Awalima for help with something suspicious, but he declined. When he asked about the woman's screams, Innocent insisted he shouldn't worry about it, and then hung up. In April 2019, evidence and forensic examination results were presented in court, revealing the extent of the cruelty involved in the case. Innocent was identified as the person responsible for Pamela's death. The toxicology report indicated that the level of the prohibited substance found in her blood was insufficient to cause a fatal overdose. The most shocking aspect was how Innocent handled Pamela's body. He attempted to eliminate all evidence of his involvement by using a caustic cleaning agent on her body, including sensitive areas. What is worrying is that Innocent carried out the act methodically, suggesting that he had experience in disposing of bodies. This indicates that this was not the first time he had committed such a crime. On May 29, 2019, a jury found Oseghale not guilty of murdering Pamela Mastropietro, as well as abusing and hiding her body. He was sentenced to life in prison. The defense lawyers were dissatisfied with the verdict and filed an appeal, but on October 16, 2020, the life sentence was upheld. The situation regarding Innocent's accomplices, Desmond and Awalima, was complicated. They were involved in the case and likely knew about the two suitcases with a foul odor that Innocent had suddenly discarded in a ditch. It was clear that they were trying to hide something. Many people believed that they were at least partially responsible for concealing the body, but there was no direct evidence linking them to the crime. Consequently, Judge Marat officially dismissed the murder and evidence concealment charges against them. However, they were not released from prison because they faced charges of selling prohibited substances. Authorities found evidence of prohibited substance use and a significant quantity of prohibited substances for sale in their apartments. In April 2019, Desmond Lucky and Lucky Awalima were sentenced to over 8 years in prison. In memory of her daughter, Pamela's mother fulfilled the dreams Pamela never had the chance to fulfill. At the time of Pamela's death, she was only months away from graduating with a diploma in Social Security and healthcare. Pamela had always aspired to be a volunteer and help others. On September 9, 2020, her mother received that diploma in her daughter's honor. Every day, she remembers Pamela, who never got a second chance at a normal life and was tragically exploited by deceitful individuals, one of whom took her life so cruelly. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Leslie Reeves. On November 20, 2021, Leslie Reeves and Chris Smith met at a bar where Chris was performing as the lead singer of a band. After their initial meeting, Chris invited Leslie back to the bar for a friendly get-together. What started as a casual dinner quickly turned into something more, as they both felt a strong attraction to each other. They met again on November 24, 2021, just before Thanksgiving, at their favorite bar. The bar was packed, but they had made reservations. Those who were there that night remembered Chris and Leslie as a fun couple, full of laughter and conversation, with no signs of conflict between them. Leslie and Chris then got ready and went to his house. Leslie felt comfortable being alone with Chris, as he had made a positive impression on her. Additionally, Leslie was very good at defending herself, which made her feel safer when visiting him. Chris lived on a farm 100 kilometers away from the bar in Farmer City, Illinois, USA. At around 10 p.m., Leslie sent her friend Nanette Stuber a text message saying that something was wrong, but she did not provide any further details. Coincidentally, Nanette was asleep at the time and did not read the message until the next morning. This turned out to be the last message sent by Leslie Reeves. When Nanette woke up, she was eager to talk to Leslie about her date with Chris. Instead, she was alarmed to see Leslie's disturbing message. Nanette texted back asking what had happened, but Leslie did not respond and ignored all attempts to contact her. This lack of communication made Leslie's friend even more worried. Fortunately, Leslie had shared Chris's address, so Nanette decided to go there to check on her. She headed toward Farmer City while also calling the police. Knowing that the trip would take over an hour, she planned to request a welfare check on Leslie. As Nanette approached the farm, she saw another car parked nearby. It belonged to Chris's friend, who had been trying to contact the band's lead singer and wanted to check on him. They decided to explore the area around the house and look inside. As they approached from behind, they noticed that the door was broken and there was a shattered window. Looking inside, they saw a foot on the floor. Chris's friend quickly ran to his car, grabbed his phone, and called emergency services to report a dead body in the house. When the police arrived, they discovered even more heartbreaking scenes. Chris was the first to be brought out. He was alive but severely injured, covered in blood and struggling to breathe. Doctors feared he might not survive the trip to the hospital. The second victim, a woman who had accompanied him from the bar, was taken out. Chris was a local celebrity, the lead singer of a band. Forensic investigators and the sheriff began their work at the farm, while Nanette waited outside in her car. Confused and anxious, she tried to figure out what had happened to her friend, but no one would provide information about Leslie. Overcome with anxiety, Nanette went to the police to share vital information. She explained that the night before Thanksgiving, Leslie had gone on a date with a man named Chris, the first person to be taken from the house. When the police asked to see a photo of her friend, Nanette showed them the pictures on her phone. Then the police delivered the heartbreaking news: Leslie had been shot and was dead. However, Chris was still alive but in critical condition and was rushed to the medical center for surgery. Although his condition had stabilized slightly, it was still serious. Police conducted a thorough search of the crime scene, Chris's car, and his personal belongings. They focused particularly on the communication equipment in the home. The scene revealed numerous damaged items, including a broken back door, shattered windows, and a displaced refrigerator. An overturned table and scattered chairs indicated a struggle. Initially, police believed that Chris had attacked Leslie in his own home, leading to a fight that left both of them injured. Leslie died almost instantly, making Chris a suspect. However, further investigation revealed that no weapon was found at the crime scene, which raised suspicions. It appeared that the attacker had been armed. The police concluded that Chris was unlikely to be the attacker, as neither Leslie nor Chris had weapons. Additional findings confirmed that Chris did not attack Leslie. A burned pizza was found, indicating that the couple had planned to cook and eat dinner together that evening before the attack. Evidence suggested that the attacker had come to their home, and that they had attempted to defend themselves. Chris was shot first while Leslie fought back. The chaos around her suggested a struggle. She had been shot once in the head, resulting in her death. Police discovered 2 silver bullet casings from a 9mm handgun, one in the kitchen near Chris's body and one in the living room next to Leslie's. To piece together what had happened, police began investigating Leslie and Chris's backgrounds. Chris Smith was a friendly 48-year-old man who had been divorced less than a year before the shooting. Chris worked in pool construction and also played music with his band. He was known in the community as a kind and dedicated person who devoted himself to singing. Almost everyone recognized him by name and face. He had no legal problems, no history of violence, drug use, or involvement in criminal activity. Leslie believed Chris would be the ideal partner for family life. At the time, Chris lived in a large house in a nearby town with his mother and sister. They described him as a workaholic, spending all of his free time focused on his career. The family was close and deeply saddened by what happened to Chris. They had a dog named Tiki, who doctors said played a key role in Chris's survival that night. During the 12 hours Chris bled out before he was discovered, Tiki lay on top of him, keeping him warm. Experts believe the dog sensed Chris's distress and helped him through the situation. Leslie Reeves, a 40-year-old mother of 2, lived about an hour south of Farmersville. She was divorced and had a master's degree in engineering. However, she chose a different path and became a Pilates and women's self-defense instructor. Leslie was very active and used her social media channels to promote her work. When the police asked about potential suspects in Leslie's attack, Nanette provided the most valuable information. Nanette knew Leslie well and recalled that one person who had acted inappropriately was her ex-boyfriend, Robert Tarr. Leslie had ended their relationship long before the attack, but Robert responded by stalking her. He became so persistent that she was forced to block him from her emails, text messages, and phone calls. Although Leslie tried to cut off contact, Robert refused to accept her decision. News of the crime spread throughout the area, eventually reaching a close friend of Leslie's who lived near the city. She confirmed what she had heard and identified Robert Tarr as the only person capable of carrying out such an attack. Leslie's close friend quickly contacted the police to report him, and suspicions against Robert continued to grow. Meanwhile, Chris remained in the hospital. X-rays showed that a bullet had entered his brain between the 2 hemispheres. If it had traveled just 2 mm deeper, he would have died. When his family learned of the incident, his mother and sisters rushed to the medical center to assist him. The trip took 2 hours, during which they were very worried about him. Chris's relationship with Leslie was short-lived and somewhat unexpected, so most of his relatives were unaware of it. While the doctors worked hard, they had to remove part of Chris's skull to access the soft tissues, remove some of the bone fragments that had penetrated his brain, and extract the bullet. It was time to meet Robert Tarr, a divorced father of 3 living in Collinsville. Thanks to Nanette, they were able to contact him and arrange a meeting. From the beginning, Robert did not question why the police were interested in him and agreed to come to the station without a lawyer. Although the deceased's best friend Leslie reported that she had broken up with Robert, he insisted that they were still together, although he admitted that their relationship had problems. Robert denied any involvement in the crime, stating that he had never been to Farmersville and did not know Chris Smith. When questioned about his alibi, he recounted his activities the day before Thanksgiving, claiming that he spent most of the day with a friend until 6:30 p.m., after which he returned home and met only his daughter. However, his alibi was not convincing. There were many holes in his story, and no one could confirm his whereabouts at certain times, making it seem as if he was trying to hide something. The shooting occurred at 1 a.m., while Robert insisted that he had been home long before. Robert's daughter, who was brought to the police station and partially supported his account, said that he had come home around 6:30 p.m., left, and returned around 9 p.m. Robert appeared very upset during questioning. He cried and said that he missed Leslie. His daughter was confused about the situation. The police believed he left to follow Leslie and saw her with a new man named Chris. He stayed with his daughter until she went to bed around 10 p.m. However, at around 2:45 a.m., Robert's daughter woke up to noises in the house. Robert was frantically doing laundry and kept saying he couldn't sleep, which raised suspicions. Robert's daughter also mentioned that her father owned a gun. While the two were at the police station, officers searched their home and discovered a gun. When they showed it to Robert's daughter, she realized that her father had used another gun just the day before. The police checked Robert's movements to verify his alibi. They found that he had filled up his gas tank at a gas station near Farmer about 15 to 20 minutes before the murder, and they obtained a receipt as evidence. Robert was caught on surveillance cameras at various locations as he traveled to the city. This evidence contradicted Robert's earlier claims that he had never heard of Farmersville and had never been there. He was eventually arrested after being caught lying, which allowed the police to detain him and prevent him from fleeing. Chris's family was relieved, as they feared the criminal might return to harm the survivor. Just a day after the arrest, more circumstantial evidence against Robert continued to emerge, and the police believed they had the right man. Robert's lawyer quickly appeared on television to discuss the case, asserting his client's innocence. Robert's story changed rapidly. He claimed that at 6:40 p.m., Leslie called him out of the blue, asking for a ride to a friend's house in Farmersville. He said he arrived at 7:30 p.m., dropped Leslie off near Chris's house, and then returned home. He explained his earlier lies by saying that he was afraid of attracting police attention. Robert claimed that he had simply picked up Leslie and left, insisting that he had not shot anyone. However, the timeline did not match his daughter's account. He stated that there was tension between his daughter and Leslie, so he did not want to worry her any further. In contrast, Robert's daughter described Leslie as a kind woman, and they quickly formed a close bond. Meanwhile, Robert's web of lies continued to grow. He attempted to challenge the police's theories while speaking to reporters, arguing that the police had found no glass or blood in the car he was driving, nor was there any other evidence linking him to the murders. Additionally, no DNA samples from the victims were found at the crime scene or in his car. Robert's defense attorneys used these points to support their case. The police desperately needed physical evidence. Ideally, a pistol containing the bullets used in the crime to conduct ballistics testing. Unfortunately, their initial search was unsuccessful. However, a few days later, Robert's daughter contacted the police, stating that she had found the gun he used in the attack. The weapon was safely stored in a thick Ziploc bag and hidden in the yard, possibly to prevent rain damage, suggesting that the perpetrator intended to use it again. The bag contained numerous fingerprints belonging to Robert, making the discovery significant to the investigation. Despite this evidence, Robert maintained his innocence and attempted to manipulate the facts. Although there were numerous fingerprints on the Ziploc bag, there were none on the gun itself, indicating that Robert had attempted to clean it. However, he was not clever enough to dispose of it. Further analysis revealed that he had not cleaned the gun properly, as tiny drops of Leslie's blood were found on it. To justify himself, Robert began telling a story that the gun actually belonged to Leslie, and that she had asked him to hide it. He claimed that Leslie had learned how to use a gun. However, her shooting instructor, a friend of Leslie's, refuted Robert's story, stating that he had never seen the weapon with her. Leslie's friend insisted that Leslie did not carry a gun for self-defense on that date. If she had had a gun with her, the attacker would not have been able to leave alive. She would have been able to defend herself. Despite everything, Robert maintains his innocence. The outcome depends on the survivor's memory. Chris Smith, the prosecution's main witness, survived the brutal attack but remains in a drug-induced coma. Doctors report some positive progress, but it is too early to make any predictions about his recovery. While waiting for Chris to regain consciousness, Robert's cellmate approached the police with a disturbing confession. He revealed that Robert tried to hire him as a hitman to kill Chris Smith and the chief prosecutor for $110,000, even paying $10,000 up front. In response, security at the hospital was increased. Investigations were conducted thoroughly, but no evidence supporting the attack was discovered. Robert claims that he never considered hiring a hitman. He stated that he gave $10,000, but it was to bail out a friend. However, this raises the question of why Robert would hand over such a large sum to someone he barely knew. Regardless, Robert's situation only worsened. To clarify the matter, they had to wait until Chris regained consciousness. Thankfully, he opened his eyes in early January 2022, about 2 months after the attack. This marked the beginning of his long recovery process. Chris had to relearn basic skills such as walking, eating, and talking. He approached the rehabilitation process with determination, demonstrating strong physical abilities from the start. Unfortunately, his cognitive recovery did not go smoothly. After waking from the coma, he faced significant memory gaps, especially regarding the night of the attack. He couldn't even remember who Leslie was, or recall anything about that evening. Additionally, Chris had to live with a bullet lodged in his brain. Doctors couldn't remove the bullet due to the risks involved. They found that attempting surgery could cause damage to the surrounding area, potentially leading to serious consequences. As he continued to deal with memory issues, Robert's trial was set for April 2024. At the start of the hearing, prosecutors claimed that Robert had intentionally gone to Chris's house to kill Leslie Reeves after seeing them together that evening. Evidence showed that he had been following Leslie throughout the night, suspecting she was with someone else. When he discovered that she was dating a new man, he became extremely angry. Police found numerous text messages between him and his best friend, in which Robert frequently expressed his frustration with Leslie, particularly that evening. It was evident that he was affected by the situation. Until the very end, he still believed he was in a relationship with her and viewed Leslie's date with Chris and their trip home as a betrayal. After witnessing how happy Leslie and Chris were together, Robert returned home, where his daughter found him crying. Knowing that the couple had gone to Farmersville, he grabbed a gun and went to Chris's house. Robert entered through the back door, but was quickly spotted, leading to an attempt to stop him. A struggle ensued, resulting in a broken window. Robert then armed himself. Leslie and Chris attempted to defend themselves by pushing the refrigerator to block their path. Unfortunately, their efforts were in vain. Chris tried to shield Leslie but was shot, and shortly after, Leslie suffered the same fate. Robert's attorneys attempted to counter the prosecutor's claims. The defense emphasized the lack of direct evidence, portraying the case as a fabrication. They argued to the jury that the investigation was focused solely on accusing Robert of assaulting two people. In fact, there was no evidence at the crime scene directly linking Robert to the crime. Chris, a key witness, could not recall the events of that night and chose not to attend the trial, claiming that he did not remember anything. The prosecution's strongest evidence was a container found at Robert's home that held the bullets used in the attack on Leslie and Chris. Furthermore, Robert was responsible for packing and hiding the gun. He chose not to testify, which his attorney described as a strategic move. Additionally, the defense did not present any witnesses. After hearing the arguments, the jury deliberated for 3 hours and reached a unanimous verdict, finding Robert Tarr guilty of first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 85 years in prison, eligible for parole after 72 years, meaning he will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. At this point, Chris finally took the stand in court and spoke about the impact the shooting had on him and his family. This tragic event completely destroyed Chris's life. At 49, he was never able to return to his beloved construction job. While he was in the hospital, his home was completely looted, and even his swimming pool was stolen. After his release, he auctioned off his home, which was later demolished, leaving only an empty lot. He now bore the responsibility of providing for his family. Friends and family remain hopeful that Chris Smith can rebuild his life, but there is a strong possibility that he will never be the same again. While waiting for his memory to improve, he practices every day and learns to do without assistance. Eventually, Chris regained his position as the lead singer in his band. However, the after effects of that senseless attack continue to haunt him as he recovers. The left side of his body remains paralyzed, and he has sought help from a leading medical research center. Chris is eager to participate in advanced research to aid his recovery. He is currently writing a book about his experiences, focusing on domestic violence. Leslie's children are in the care of her ex-husband. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Rachel Maidens. Rachel Maidens and Randy live in a large mansion. The 600-acre estate is located in one of the most affluent and respected areas of the city. Their home is like a fortress, providing a safe environment for both family life and business. Rachel Maidens, a successful orthodontist, owns a private practice in the city's downtown area. She is known for her beauty, being a natural blonde, and is a devoted mother to her daughter Natalie, who attends a private Catholic school. After completing her undergraduate degree, Rachel went on to dental school in Florida. Throughout her studies, she received numerous accolades for her accomplishments, including a prestigious scholarship. She completed her residency at Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C., marking the culmination of her education. Despite her young age, Rachel's thriving career has allowed her to establish her own practice, publish articles in peer-reviewed journals, and speak regularly at conferences. Not everything in Rachel's life has been a success. During her college years, her father was arrested for selling illegal banned substance. Despite being a respected pharmacist, he became involved in the sale of prescription drugs. Faced with the shame of his arrest, and before an investigation could be launched, he tragically chose to take his own life just 2 days later. The family's ordeal did not end there. The police continued their investigation, which resulted in the freezing of bank accounts belonging to Rachel, her mother, and her brother. This investigation dragged on for years, culminating in Rachel's mother being ordered to pay a $15,000 fine, marking a dark period in Rachel's life. Many friends and family members noted that these events had a significant negative impact on her emotional health. Despite these challenges, Rachel did not let them stop her from pursuing career success. She faced these difficulties with resilience, continuing to strive for personal and professional growth. Determined to excel in her field, Rachel overcame her family's financial crisis, dealt with the tragic loss of her father, and ultimately regained control of her life. Her husband, Randy Maidens, grew up in Georgia. After completing his education, he attended Georgia Tech and eventually became a well-paid pharmaceutical sales manager. However, he lost his job. Randy began struggling with alcoholism, and Rachel suspected that he was also using various illegal substances, which made the situation worse. During this time, multiple witnesses saw Randy enter a restaurant in an intoxicated state, disturbing both customers and employees. One employee felt the need to call 911. The employee recognized him as Randy Maidens, as he frequently visited the restaurant with his wife. Minutes after the first call, she called 911 again to express her growing concern. She mentioned that Randy had accidentally dropped several disturbing items from his pocket, including a shotgun shell casing and a large bottle that looked like a painkiller, such as Tylenol, prompting the police to rush to the scene. Randy attempted to leave the restaurant, but the staff convinced him to stay. When the police arrived, they noticed that he was acting strangely, although they could not determine whether he was simply drunk or under the influence of something stronger. Randy appeared concerned and tried to explain that his wife needed him to go home. When the restaurant staff offered to call his wife, he refused to provide her phone number. He then attempted to get into his car, but the police stopped him. They searched his vehicle and discovered a handgun in the back seat. Despite the unusual circumstances, he was not arrested. Several witnesses noted that someone had helped him into his car that night, preventing him from driving while intoxicated. On the evening of April 21, 2013, Elizabeth Frisbee, Rachel's mother, called the Brentwood Police Department, asking them to check on her daughter's home. Elizabeth had been trying to contact Rachel for a long time, but when she called, Randy answered and refused to let her speak to her daughter. Frustrated, the mother threatened to call the police. The police quickly arrived at Rachel's house and found that all the blinds were drawn, making it impossible to see inside. No one answered when they knocked, but they discovered the garage door open, allowing them to enter the house. They called for Rachel and Randy, but neither was present. They were surprised to hear screams coming from the second floor. A 2-year-old girl named Natalie was crying there. While checking the second floor, a police officer entered the hallway leading to the master bedroom. The scene was tragic. Rachel had been murdered. Randy quickly became the prime suspect and was placed on the search list. To prevent him from escaping, helicopters and special forces were dispatched to the area. The upscale neighborhood resembled a scene from a Hollywood movie as the police teamed up with Rachel's neighbors to track down Randy. Police informed Rachel's relatives, who picked up her daughter, Natalie. Randy was considered particularly dangerous due to his recent erratic behavior, and it was believed he was still armed, which led to heightened alerts. Neighbors reported witnessing him behaving inappropriately on several occasions. A note was found on the kitchen table. In it, Randy sincerely apologized to his daughter and expressed his deep love for her. He mentioned that he had to run away because of a terrible act he had committed, although he did not explain what that act was. Randy expressed his gratitude to his wife's relatives for the years they had shared. He revealed that he could no longer bear the daily humiliation he faced from his wife. For 6 years, he had felt emotionally tormented every evening. That night, his wife began to provoke him again, pushing him over the edge. Randy, a loving father, wanted to protect his daughter, Natalie. He also stated that he wished to give custody to Rachel's relatives. When the police examined the note, Randy was still missing. Some experts believed the letter could be both a confession and a final goodbye, complicating the search by raising the possibility that he may have died. Interestingly, a car belonging to Randy was found in the private driveway of the mansion. Inside the trunk, police discovered $87,000 in cash packed in a large bag. Additionally, about $10,000 more was uncovered through phone records. Police learned that on the night of the murder, Randy had called his lawyer. It seems his original plan was to kill his wife and escape with the money to start over. However, something went wrong. Why didn't he take his car? What stopped him? Police began to suspect that this might have been related to calls from Rachel's mother, Elizabeth. She contacted the police, which could have thwarted Randy's plans. The police were surprised that the search for Randy did not last long. Just 12 hours after it began, he walked out of the woods behind his house with his hands up and surrendered to the police without a fight. He immediately blamed his wife and the pressure he felt from her behavior. He defended himself by stating that he was Rachel's third husband, as the previous two could not tolerate her constant nagging. However, this did not excuse the 10 shots he fired into her back. Following his wife's murder, it was discovered that he had recently faced several legal issues due to minor offenses. A few months before the tragic incident, Randy was stopped by the police for driving under the influence, but he refused to take a breathalyzer test. By law, this refusal is considered an admission of drunk driving. He subsequently caused a drunk driving accident, crashing into a substation and cutting off power to nearly 200 homes for hours. In the weeks before Rachel was murdered, a neighbor spotted a man wearing a ski mask running through the woods with 2 dogs, near the area where Randy later surrendered to the police. When the neighbor approached the man, she recognized him as Randy. After speaking to him, she quickly realized he appeared to be very intoxicated or possibly under the influence of banned substance. Randy claimed he was walking his dog and got lost. The neighbor noticed he had something like a bow and arrow in his backpack, which made her feel unsafe, so she left. Randy had been seen engaging in similar behavior on several occasions, causing concern among residents, particularly those living near Randy's family, who feared for their safety. In January 2013, at a work conference in Orlando, which he attended with Rachel, Randy went to a bar one evening and became intoxicated. When the staff asked him to leave, he responded by smashing dishes and swearing. Several witnesses reported hearing him threaten to kill his wife during this outburst. Several customers tried to help by escorting him out, but he started fighting again, prompting them to call the police. He was eventually arrested for disorderly conduct and public intoxication, but was released the following day. The pharmaceutical company he worked for was very concerned about its reputation after this incident. One of his co-workers, who wished to remain anonymous, suggested that he take a medical leave of absence, but Randy ignored the advice and returned to work after 3 days. As a result, he was fired. During the investigation, the police worked extensively with Randy's colleagues. According to them, Randy's behavior began to change dramatically a few months before Rachel was murdered. Although he never explained the reason for this change, he often complained about his wife and blamed her for his problems. However, those around him found it hard to believe that his wife could push him to such extremes, as Rachel always appeared sweet and calm. At the time of the murder, Randy's ex-girlfriend was trying to reconnect with him. They had dated in high school, but had drifted apart over time. Now divorced and reminiscing about their past, she wanted to rekindle their relationship as adults. She was aware of the family problems Randy was facing and believed that his situation would eventually lead to divorce. Randy's ex-girlfriend was surprised by the recent events in his life and felt she could help him get back on track. Having known him for over 10 years, they had maintained a friendship throughout that time. She saw Randy as a caring and intelligent man who valued his family and loved his daughter. However, she also knew about the more troubled aspects of his life. She was aware that he had endured a difficult childhood, living with an alcoholic father who abused him and had a strained relationship with his mother. These circumstances contributed to his reluctance to leave his daughter Natalie in the care of relatives. Randy's ex-girlfriend suspected that his marital problems and challenging childhood had affected him, leading to his need for support. Co-workers at the company where Randy worked noted that they had known about his struggles with substance abuse long before the incident. Both co-workers and management reported that he openly acknowledged his struggle with addiction. Although he was believed to have overcome these challenges in the years leading up to the attack, he eventually relapsed. What caused Randy's shocking behavior that led to his wife's murder? Shortly after his arrest, Randy was charged with first-degree murder. He also faced charges of endangering the life of a child. Additionally, he was charged with tampering with evidence for attempting to remove bloodstains and hide the blanket he used. Police believe he was attempting to destroy evidence of the crime and intended to flee. Randy was initially released on a $25 million bail while awaiting trial. His attorney sought to have his bail lowered and to ensure he was released on house arrest, arguing that Randy was a victim of his wife's control. The attorney pointed out that although a significant amount of cash was found in Randy's car, there was no evidence, such as documents or cards, indicating that he was planning to leave the city. The defense claimed that Randy had multiple opportunities to escape, but chose not to. However, the prosecutor's office disagreed. They had a witness who initially claimed to have heard Randy discuss plans to flee to Mexico, but this testimony was later proven false. Meanwhile, Rachel's mother filed a civil lawsuit against Randy to block him from accessing joint accounts and assets with his wife. She feared that Randy might evade justice by bribing officials with family assets. Despite the challenges, the situation eventually turned in Randy's favor. The attorney successfully negotiated a significant reduction in bail to $750,000, which Randy promptly paid. He would remain free for at least another year and a half while he awaited further hearings, with a trial set for September 2014. Surprisingly, the judge allowed him to continue living in the house where Rachel was murdered. However, this arrangement came with complications. He had to comply with bail conditions that required him to notify the police at least 24 hours before entering the house. Additionally, he was required to have an attorney with him at all times and wear a GPS tracking bracelet on his ankle. He was also prohibited from contacting his daughter and Rachel's family. Meanwhile, Rachel's mother continued her legal battle while awaiting a decision on her civil lawsuit. She eventually obtained a court order freezing the couple's assets. Despite this, Randy entered the home and took her belongings, leading to a new charge of contempt of court. However, thanks to the efforts of his attorney, the charge was dismissed. During the investigation, it was discovered that Randy had not simply fled into the woods after the murder. Several neighbors reported that the morning after the incident, they found evidence of attempts to break into their homes through both the garage door and the front door. Police reviewed surveillance video from a nearby club and confirmed that Randy was the one trying to approach the neighbors. He posed a significant threat, but he denied the allegations. Over time, the situation was de-escalated. Judges who allowed Randy, who was clearly out of control, to remain free for a year and a half faced criticism. During this time, he lived in an apartment complex in Bellevue, a suburb of Nashville. A resident reported an incident involving Randy, who attempted to enter the building by knocking on the door and pretending to be a police officer. The resident refused to open the door but heard Randy attempting to enter other apartments. Concerned, he called the police. When they arrived, they found Randy extremely intoxicated. The next day, the judge revoked his bail. Incredibly, Randy's erratic and intoxicated behavior continued both before and after the murder of his wife. The fear that Randy's neighbors felt over the past year, especially when they learned that he had been released on bail and would be living next door to them in his family's mansion, was palpable. It seemed as though justice would soon be served, as his crimes were punishable by death under Tennessee law. However, his skilled defense attorney had a strategic plan. On September 29, 2014, Randy reached a plea deal with the prosecution, pleading guilty to second-degree murder and child neglect. As a result, he was sentenced to just 25 years in prison, less than half of the maximum sentence of 60 years for those charges. In addition, his attorney managed to secure the possibility of parole, which could be granted if he demonstrated good behavior in prison. Since Randy was 42 at the time of his sentencing, he was likely to be released around the age of 60. During the trial, Randy Maidens expressed his remorse to Rachel's family, stating that he had promised to love and cherish everyone, but had betrayed that promise. He felt he would have to live with this pain forever. and he believed there was no prison worse than the one he had brought upon himself. Randy also sincerely apologized to all of Rachel's family and friends for the pain and suffering he had caused them. Rachel's mother felt deeply offended by the court's decision. She appealed to the High Court several times to review the sentence and impose a harsher penalty, but her efforts were unsuccessful. Rachel's family was shocked by the decisions made during the investigation and trial. Her mother and brother spoke out in the media to express their displeasure, emphasizing their sadness over Rachel's tragic and brutal death as a beautiful, successful woman. They protested the seemingly unreasonable decisions of the justice system, which appeared to favor the criminal. Randy had never been charged with contempt of court, tampering with evidence, or previous offenses such as drunk driving. In response to the family's statements, Randy's attorney expressed his client's sincere regret and condolences. However, Rachel's mother felt that these words were insincere and did not comfort her or bring Rachel back. Their daughter, Natalie, will inherit her parents' fortune when she comes of age.